A woman's voice screamed loudly. Rage was bubbling up. It resonated in the air. She couldn't contain herself. She asked indignantly about the third prince. The woman turned towards Cecilia, a girl with huge eyes and snow-white hair, and scolded her for changing men as if they were gloves. Madame couldn't cope with her emotions, pointed towards the door with her fan, and didn't want to see the girl at home again. She became even more agitated as soon as she heard the girl's voice, saying she was leaving, and that everything would be fine. Even if she said they were unfounded rumors, it wouldn't make sense. The Count's daughter, Cecilia Liddon, is a dissolute woman who spends the night with anyone, a disgrace to the family. These were the rumors spread by her stepmother, a middle-aged woman with a high forehead and wrinkles around her lips. The girl put her hand to her chest and repeated that she was leaving this estate. She gathered her skirts. Cecilia turned around and left. Her stepmother pointed her finger at her and ordered her to go to her room. She covered herself with a fan, muttering about the girl. What an unpleasant girl she was. And she threw after her back that she was just like her mother. Wrapped in a black cloak, looking towards the main door, Cecilia would never regret leaving this place. She stopped a cab driver and asked him to take her south. It would be better to live in poverty than this. It would be much better to think about it. And so, a girl with red eyes and snow-white hair met the people. She said her new name. The people listened to her attentively. She only said her name. Shaw, without a surname, asked the men again. When she confirmed, they exclaimed that she was not a noblewoman and started whispering among themselves. The people doubted. The boy whispered in the ear of an older man that if the girl was from a fallen family, there would be trouble. Realizing that her fate was being decided, Shai exclaimed that she knew how to heal wounds, and that if there was no healer in the village, she could help them. Usually, the villagers tried not to accept strangers, but just as the house became empty, they pointed their finger at her. They won't throw you out. The house was small and covered in snow, but it was sturdy. They could make an exception if she wanted to stay. She crossed her hands in a gesture of thanks. She nodded her head. She was glad that while she stayed here, and would later move to another village, no one needed to know she was a noblewoman. Thoughts raced through her head. Shah lived through the whole winter. She mended the house. The villagers always came to her for help, and this time they asked her to look at his leg. She sat the man on a chair, took scissors to see the wound. She needed to cut the surrounding tissue. She warned, his knee was badly broken in his leg. Dried blood formed a scab. So, what do you do without a girl? Life becomes much easier with a healer. The man began to ask Zai about her age, about her marriage. She answered calmly, correcting him if necessary. He scratched his head, talked about what his son liked, and complained that it was hard for the boy without his mother. If the girl became a member of his family, it would be great. She extended her hand, placed it on his knee, and pressed lightly, warning him that he had better stay quiet if he wanted to walk away with a sound leg. A scream was heard. The healer wrapped his leg with a bandage. The man continued the conversation. Two lonely people should help each other. The man was talking about his own business when the girl interrupted him. She set a price for the treatment and took it from him in gold coins. A young man jumped up, indignant at such a sum, and called her Zai insolent. Because the residents gave her shelter, and she accepts that amount of money. There was a scream. I leaned back in the chair, my knee hurt. The woman smiled. If he wants to get a crutch, he must pay for the treatment. She shook her finger. He can tell everything to the village chief. Zai turned to him, counted the coins, and looked at him with condemnation. She calmly conveyed to him that she didn't care who said what, but that when the nerve under the armpit was damaged, he became paralyzed. He backed away scared. His face darkened, sweat even appeared on his forehead, and she clarified how to hold the crutch correctly. Zai closed the door in the man's face and asked again if he wasn't going to the village chief, to which the answer was no. When she was alone, Zai ran a hand over her face. She decided to flee this village and placed the bag of coins on the table. She counted her money. The earnings were enough for a cart to the next village, and she put the coins she had just received. She looked at the sunset. Although it was difficult with the inhabitants of this village, the girl felt freer than at the estate. She decided to close up. She checked the doors. She saw a man near the back door of her house. He was lying face down, with his arms outstretched. Blood was pouring out, and a puddle had already formed. She jumped out of the house, ran towards the boy and started screaming, trying to find out if everything was all right with him. She lifted the young man. It was better to take him inside. He had a large bloodstain on his chest, an abrasion, and a wound on his cheek. She sat down next to the bed, breathing heavily without strength. She couldn't lay the man on the bed. A drop of sweat rolled down her cheek. She reached out her hand to him. First, she needed to check the wounds, but she didn't touch the wound when the boy covered it with his hand and mumbled that there was no need to touch it. When she saw his fingertips turning blue, the girl realized there wasn't just one wound, but also poisoning. She got angry, shook her head, and ordered the man to immediately remove his hand and let her look. The person lying down actively resisted. He waved his hand. "You shouldn't have come close." He opened one eye and the other swam. She put on gloves. She approached him. "You have to have a little patience. Now the girl will help you," she said sweetly, tying the boy's hands with a knot. "Now it will be easier. Everything is fine." I opened my shirt, saw him, and was horrified. A long time had passed. There was also poison. It was bad. The man in front of her realized that touching him could be dangerous, so he pushed she away from him. She needed to find out the type of poison so she could find an antidote. She had no other choice. She began to remove the gloves from her hands. She had to touch the wound. After getting rid of the gloves, she pressed on his body. The room filled with light emanating from under the girl's hands. Focusing her attention on the wound, a healing white light flowed from her hands, a secret ability that the girl had hidden her entire life, even at the leading estate. Although the entire family is gifted with dark magic, she did not obtain it. Instead, a girl was born with the gift of healing, who can save people. She recalled that the family did not know about this gift, but everyone looked down on her because she did not possess dark magic. The man's wound was too deep. It seemed that the more magic she used, the weaker she became. She lay down next to him, looking at the boy's face. Today she was too tired. I touched his bandages and didn't heal him completely, but it was enough. There was definitely no more poison. After all, the girl collapsed face down on the bed without undressing. She exhaled air. The boy remained below, with his eyes bandaged. He turned his head. The gift of healing had a serious side effect, but Zai was glad she had saved the man. The next morning, a boy was banging and shouting at the healer's door, carrying a little girl on his back. The frightened girl opened the door. The boy's screams frightened her, and she tried to understand what had happened. She let the roaring boy in. She showed him where to put the girl. She pointed to the bed with her hand. Everything had to be done quickly. The boy stopped when he saw the tied-up man, but since he wasn't moving, he didn't hesitate, although he was surprised. The initial examination was performed by Shaw. Her lips turned blue. She clutched her stomach and leaned over. It looked like the girl had food poisoning. She turned to the boy. She made him recall what he had eaten recently. But no matter how hard he tried to remember, he didn't know. "I remember that my sister ate a mushroom with a red stem, and then she got hot and said her stomach hurt." The boy clenched his fists to his chest. Tears began to fall with renewed vigor. His lips trembled. He didn't understand what was happening to his sister. She warned that many mushrooms grew in the area, and almost all of them were poisonous. The girl went to her jars and bottles. She tried to reason out loud what the baby was poisoned with for the stomach ache, and took the bottle. She looked at her hands. She worried that it wouldn't help and that she could get worse at any moment. A drop of sweat rolled down her cheek because of her thoughts. Someone's hand reached out over the girl's head. The voice sounded low, with a soft timbre. "Herbs would help better." She turned her head. There stood the same saved man. His blue eyes looked at the medicine jars. The boy laughed. He pointed his finger at the children. "Now he is talking about helping them." "Shahadio." I went back to the bottles, took those same herbs, and thought that they would actually be very effective. While grinding the herbs in a mortar, the boy helped me. He brought me a saucer for convenience and suggested where and what I needed. As soon as the girl thought to herself that the young man had prepared, he washed his hands with soap. He replied that if you touch a child, you need clean hands. Carefully holding the girl's head, he helped her drink everything they prepared for her recovery. The baby cried, complaining of pain. She calmed her down, gave her some sweets. "Now it will be easier." They tried to make medicine together with the young man. The boy ran to his sister, shouting happily that everything would pass soon and she would get better. The girl smiled. A tear froze in the corner of her eye. The children were leaving. The girl was on her brother's back, waving at the girl. She promised to bring the best flower necklace. As soon as the children left, the boy laughed. He heard the girl's name, closed his eyes, and pronounced a verdict on the beautiful name. She squinted to the side and thought that the man was not a commoner. He knew medicine well, and besides, his uniform also spoke for itself. She was already afraid of what he might know about her. Cecilia, as a dissolute woman, fled, tired of the shame. But even in the villages, she encountered a nobleman. She clenched her fists and her face darkened, but the boy stood firm and introduced himself. His name is Dylan. The man shook his head. Looking around, he owed the girl a lot. The wound was serious. How did she heal it? The question arose. She looked at him, but did not reveal her secret. The treatment requires a lot of energy. If his family finds out about the gift, they will use the girl until they can't use her anymore. She imagined how hands reach out to her, how she covers her head, so everything must remain a secret. Dylan raised his hands and agreed with the girl. A secret is a secret. He will not interrogate his savior. She was curious about who inflicted that wound and assumed the monster had attacked. But the guy was embarrassed, not entirely. He straightened his coat. It's not worth worrying about. The young man calmed down. They just wanted to attack him. He closed his eyes. Dylan would do everything possible not to harm the girl. He made that promise. He turned near the door. He smiled. His eyes shone. She needed to leave. It was time. He said goodbye. The dark-haired woman smiled at the girl and said, leaning her elbow on the fence, "How good that you came to help them." And then she asked the question, "When will I come next time?" She looked at him. The answer was in a week. She had a basket of rags in her hands. She turned to leave when the woman's indignation flew after her back, saying she used to look at boys every 3 days. But Zai would no longer be in this village by then. After that mysterious man left, the girl saw a bag on the table. She opened it. Gold coins fell into her palm. It was a reward for her rescue. She would need the money now. The voice of a little girl was heard, asking to see her knee. This one was broken when she fell. Blood was pouring from the wounds. She sat on a nearby chair, a baby bottle in her hand. She asked about the pain, and the baby nodded. I poured an antiseptic on the cotton. Now I will treat the wound, and it will hurt. You can cry if you want. She spoke sweetly to the little girl. She told him every detail of what she would do. She didn't notice how the boy was watching her. A voice sounded, and he handed her the bandages. She squinted and saw white ribbons in his delicate hand. It made the girl happy that the work was done. She warned him that there was medicine for the other knee, and that it would no longer bleed. She turned around and saw Dylan, who was looking at her and smiling, so they met again. She brought her hand to her chest. She thought the boy had left. She thought it strange that a noble would have enough time for various nonsense. Dylan looked at the girl with a smile, resting his cheek on his hand. He would like to stay longer, laughing, and asked for permission. She felt embarrassed and tried to justify herself by saying there was nothing to see here. But the young man stood firm, because she comes here every day. He handed her a box of striped herbs that stopped bleeding. She was surprised. She didn't think he knew about it. I accepted the box and looked at him wondering if the man had really studied the treatment and prevention with the help of medicinal herbs. I was applying medicine to the girl's knee when I heard the boy reply that it was something similar. The man grabbed the little girl by the shoulders, turned around, saw that it was Dad, and exclaimed happily. She began to talk about the cost of her services when the man interrupted her and did not let her finish. He clapped, shouted. He heard a funny story when he recently visited the castle, and closed his eyes. He raised his head, looking for a girl. She was surprised and prepared to listen. The people around began to whisper. They found the conversation interesting. The man laughed. He told a rumor circulating there about a girl similar to Zai, although the names are not particularly different. The residents were distrustful. He shouted the name out loud. He remembered Cecilia. The healer's face turned pale. Dylan heard the name and looked intently at the man. Aristocrats constantly whisper among themselves. The man did not give this any importance, but when he heard about a girl with white hair and bright pink eyes, he remembered Shaw. She herself was breathless, waiting for what would happen next. He told gossip that she really liked gold and jewelry that men gave as gifts to introduce themselves to the aristocrat. Having chosen the decoration, the young man came closer and whispered that the girl gave herself at night. And he laughed. She tried to remain calm, lowered her eyes, and pretended that people were having fun as best they could. When placing the box, you do not need to show your emotions. Otherwise, they will understand that Cecilia in front of them, everything that was just said about her was not true. She never accepted gifts and dressed modestly. But the truth doesn't interest anyone, neither the nobles nor these people. They laughed at these rumors. An evil laugh flew out unrestrainedly. She reminded him of the payment. She threw a coin for her daughter's treatment and definitely didn't forget it. Because of this situation, the girl remembered that moment from her past when a man threw a gift at her. But in return, he wanted to pick up her flower. My hand trembled when I picked up the coin. I didn't understand why unpleasant memories arose now. She looked down. She definitely needed to leave. The time had come to leave this place, the girl thought. As darkness fell, Dylan wondered how he could have reached this place. His vision became very blurry then. He was dying. He felt. The boy remembered that his fingers started to go numb. He had no strength left. He had high resistance to poisons. But this one, no. The poison had already begun to act. I guessed then that this was the poison of the Tyre family, and only the head, a sharp-nosed, dark-haired man, had the antidote. He fell to the ground. His heart would soon stop. This is where he would die. These were Dylan's thoughts. He heard the girl's voice. He opened his eyes and remembered her bright pink eyes, but he couldn't answer anything. The young man thought, bringing his hand to his mouth, how she could neutralize the poison and almost heal the wound. He had many questions. Recalling the white-haired girl, I noticed nothing unusual or strange about her. I compared the girl Dylan to a timid rabbit, remembering her phrase that there is nothing to see here. He resolutely headed to the village. There is still time before returning. She will stay here for a couple of days. The young man overheard the men arguing among themselves about today's incident, one proving to the other that the rumor about she was true. The fire crackled in the logs, just as the men crackled incessantly, proving that the healer was a noble and wanton woman. Seeing a tree, he approached it and broke off a small branch. Dylan heard the rumor, but stubbornly pushed it away. He didn't care, but a feeling of disgust arose in him that didn't go away. It was all because of the eyes. He remembered the girl. She's eyes reminded him of his late mother. If you light a twig from this tree without drying it first, you can get a strong, paralyzing poison. And if you inhale it, it hardens your mouth and nose, causing a painful death. He leaned against a tree, his hands crossed over his chest. It was better to deal with these people now than to continue spreading rumors about Cecilia. Dylan understood from her reaction that today's conversation was about her, but he didn't believe the rumors that also said a lot about him, which was far from the truth. The fire continued to burn. The legs were moving away from this place. The bodies of the men remained lying there. There was no more laughter or jokes. She lay on the bed with her hand on her head, thinking about the words of the men, hoping that they were just joking. She understood that it wasn't about her. These rumors were spread by her stepmother to cover up Taud, who had done something. The more the brother misbehaved, the more rumors the stepmother spread. So, compared to his sister, he was a good boy. She stood up abruptly. She would not allow such humiliation again. She would not go through this again. She puts down the knife, takes the lamp. She can't sleep. She will go collect herbs just to clear her head. She went out to the herbs and collected what the girl needed for the trip, herbs that are applied to wounds. Something pulled her out of her thoughts. She looked to the side and saw a man who was thoughtful. She illuminated with a lantern the face of a boy who was no less surprised than she was. He stopped in front of her and whispered her name. Seeing her bag with a knife, I guessed correctly and went out at night to collect herbs. She nodded her head. She sat near the flowers. Her thoughts didn't allow her to sleep. The girl explained, preparing to cut the stem. Dylan extended his hand. He wanted to help the healer. He just needed a spare knife. She was surprised. Not for the first time tonight. The guy cut the grass, collected it, and showed she that she needed approval to continue like this. Or not. She looked at the cut grass in the man's hand. It was done well. Did he thank her? She knows that once the root is separated, the petals will become poisonous if they fall under moonlight. Standing with his back to she, he admired the huge moon. They had collected enough. They showed curiosity and would treat the villagers. I looked cautiously. Herbs are a good remedy for treating simple wounds and healing them. Dylan's questions sounded unexpectedly rude. She was friendly to everyone. It even confused me a little. She didn't know what to answer. After all, this place is full of villagers who will only be happy to betray anyone who comes here. He continued to press the girl with his words. She didn't know about the rumors that the neighbors were spreading behind her back. She calmly replied that she could not suspect everyone and anyone, that she did not succumb to the man's provocation. The girl knew everything about the villagers, but as long as she lives here, she will treat them. The boy opened his mouth at such an answer. He never expected it. She half turned towards him, closed her eyes. She was used to dealing with people's hostility, but not everyone here was in a bad mood towards her. She turned towards him, hugging the bag of herbs. He still believes in her. He gives her a chance. Maybe if she shows kindness now, he will come back to her. Dylan didn't understand it. He was exposing himself to enormous risks for the sake of a ghostly opportunity. He couldn't understand it. The man thought the exact opposite. She has ideals. She believes in luck. If he doesn't believe in this person, then who can? The price of faith is very high. The boy realized very early, at the age of 6, that the world around him is very dangerous. She decided to open up and said that her previous home was not happy, that the people there hated her. I looked at the sky, now searching for a place to breathe deeply, but at home I was suffocating. With no one to talk to, no one to trust. A red flush appeared on Dylan's cheeks. He couldn't separate himself from the girl, he explained. He justified himself by the fact that her eyes were similar to his mother's. He lowered his gaze and tried to calm down. She was just a stranger he had met a few days ago. But at the same time, Dylan feared that if he hurt her while smiling, he might receive a knife in the back. Like his mother, he compared the two women. The mother believed in her first love and drank poisoned tea. The woman's heart stopped even before the smile disappeared from her face. He gripped the knife in his hand tighter, so much so that his hands trembled. The man didn't understand why he was experiencing this. She would never have run away. She would have brought her hand to her chest. She would have wanted to be destroyed in a place where she trusted no one. And she would never have ended up here. She remembered how she ran away from home. She ran away to change, to get out of the nightmare, at least for a moment. The girl felt ashamed. She laughed upon finding something she could believe in. Life will not change if you stay still. He looked at she. She did nothing, but she was so charming that I felt uncomfortable. Seeing a smile, a desire appeared to protect and protect, so that the smile would not leave her lips. He was surprised by her passion, by her madness. I remembered my mother. Someday, a man will understand why she goes there. Although the woman understood there was a trap, she still answered the letter. With tears in his eyes, the little one watched his mother leave, always considering her actions foolishness. But if a girl gives him poisoned tea, she will happily drink it and bring the cup to her mouth. The stunned young man begins to understand his mother, whom he thought he would never understand. Maybe love is to blame. That day, on a dark night under the moon, the girl's smiling gaze was imprinted forever in the man's head. She noticed that something strange was happening to Dylan. She turned around and called him. The girl took the man home. She sat him on a chair and asked him to show her the wound, untying the bag of herbs. She began to remove the bloody bandage. "There is nothing to do," she murmured. "Everything will heal soon." Shia flew to Dylan and shouted that he had to do it, stopping him with a hand gesture. She blushed. A drop of sweat rolled down her cheek. She apologized for hitting the man. It was awkward. She felt guilty. Dylan smiled and sincerely reassured the healer. "It's okay, let her continue." She nodded her head, worried about her clothes, about the white shirt that had blood on it, and about the wound. Either she took his hand or poured the contents of the bottle onto the wound. The man's question about who offended her in the old house took her by surprise. He wanted to know the reasons, and his hand froze. I decided to tell him a little, because I was sure I would never meet this strange young man again. And I told him about my stepmother and my brother, whom everyone loved very much. "In that house, they will not be happy if they find out that she has the gift of healing," she murmured in a low voice. She understood that even the act of sitting here with Dylan would create many scandals. She looked sadly. She glanced at her hand. She regretted that they were so ignorant of such a gift. "It is very easy to hurt others," said the man, staring intently. "But taking care of someone is very hard work." She was left alone, looking at the closed door, and the last words of thanks echoed in her hut. Everything was over. They would not see each other again now. She looked at the chair and saw a bouquet as white as snow, like her hair, alone, waiting for its owner. A red flush appeared on her cheeks. She pressed the bouquet tightly against her chest. A faint hope settled in the little girl's heart. Maybe he would believe her. She bent down to inhale the delicate scent of the flowers. She was upset because she had just met, and would have to part immediately with this mysterious man. Suddenly, Zai heard the sound of hooves. Her face darkened. She knew there were no horses in this village. A guess shot through her. Her face instantly became scared. They pulled the door open. A man in the Lidden family uniform entered. He shouted what he had found. The whole little girl shrank in fear, clutching the flowers against her chest. He grabbed Zai's hand tightly. He pulled her towards himself. He behaved rudely and very angrily towards her. He muttered that she was hiding like a rat and ran away. He dragged the girl out of the house, still holding her hand tightly, paying no attention to the pain. She screamed, but nothing and no one could help her. He shoved her into the carriage and closed it. Only the man's smiling face could be seen through the window. The scream got stuck in her throat. She couldn't believe they had found her. Through tears, she looked at the men in the room. She was barely visible through the tears. She heard her father talking to the one who brought her back. She heard that she had no independence. She also managed to heal people. All the words stuck like stakes into the girl. She sat motionless, clutching her sleeve. She only saw how her brother, Thowd, loomed over her and how he held his chin. And smiled. The girl's father gave the order to burn everything that was in the village there, leaving no trace of their presence. The guard obediently felt, ready to fulfill the request, and to assign security to Cecilia, who will watch her 24 hours a day. He remained just as lost. Looking at the floor, the stepmother covered herself with a fan and was indignant that someone could live with commoners. It was a disgrace for a noblewoman. The father turned to his daughter. He told her that she should not dare to disappoint him again. She hunched over and shrank even further at this. Then, as if nothing had happened, as if this whole situation and the girl sitting on the floor had never happened, he turned to Thowd, placed his hand on his shoulder and praised him, telling him that the Marquis would forgive all his debts. After the men left, the stepmother directed her anger towards Cecilia. She closed her fan and pointed in her direction, snorting indignantly at the fact that she left. Anne didn't tell him. She squeezed her torn sleeve tighter. The girl did not raise her head. She only listened to the woman upstairs giving orders. In the end, she returned home, to a place where there is not a single person by her side, to this hellish pit of despair. Addressing the girl, the stepmother said that she herself would know how to behave at the Marquis's ball. The maids rushed over, grabbed her by the elbows, and began to lift Cecilia. She already knew they wanted to use her again to stop the rumors about her brother. She tucked her fan into her head. In any case, the girl was not fit for anything else. These words were spoken by her stepmother. She squinted. You must behave obediently if Cecilia doesn't want to end up at the bottom. How sad the lady was. She only felt the taste of freedom. This is the most terrible thing that can happen. She missed the village, but above all, she felt sorry for that young man, whom she would never see again. After a while, horses rushed towards the Marquis's banquet. The sun cast its bright rays, even making its way through the trees. Cecilia was in the carriage, touching her earrings with her hands. She wore a lot of jewelry, apparently from those with whom she spent the nights. Thoughts of escaping arose, opening the door and jumping out, but she closed the curtain and lowered her eyes. She couldn't, it would only draw attention. The carriage stopped near the gate. The guards rushed to open it. The girl thought about the rumors there would be this time. Curiosity gnawed at her. They knocked on the door. They need to check the invitation. Only then will they be allowed to enter. But I saw who was sitting in the carriage. The man's attitude immediately changed. He bowed. He asked to pass. Everything would be arranged for a comfortable stay. Cecilia's eyes opened. She did not expect this. They usually called her that, and she laughed. Fear crawling under her skin. The girl clasped her hands in her lap. In her head was one terrible conjecture after another. What if her brother was plotting something? The carriage stopped. The servant announced that the Lord wanted to see her, so he notified the Marquis. The lady showed curiosity. She wanted to know who this gentleman was. The guy answered, His Excellency Duke Karsha. I thought so. His reputation was very good, the complete opposite of the girl. Why should they meet? She didn't know the answer. He drew his sword. But if the lady does not want to, then there is no need to bring her. The meeting will only take place at her request. Cecilia didn't know why the Duke needed her, but it was better than going to a banquet where all eyes would be on her. Upon hearing the agreement, Yumi raised her cheerful face, a very cold, youthful smile. The boy introduced another knight who would accompany the girl. The knight was my woman. Cecilia was surprised by this, but if she guided her, then no rumors would arise. It was very good. They were approaching a building for important guests. The building was made of white marble. The door was heavy, made of wood. Cecilia looked around. She was surprised. She thought she would see more people here, but there was no one. The knight stopped on the sides of another door. He made a gesture with his hand. The knight is waiting and you will stay here, said the boy, smiling. The girl entered. She heard a soft voice. She saw a man standing with his back to her, with yellow hair spread over his shoulders. Cecilia recognized this man. She screamed. She opened her mouth in shock. It was the same boy from the village. She twisted her fingers and tried to compose herself, because it was a meeting with the Duke. Not with that boy, but with His Highness. She narrowed her eyes to the side. She looked confused. She decided, and she bitterly thought about how she could do this. The man remained standing in front of the window, without turning around. So the girl decided to speak and addressed him formally. Cecilia tried to address him again, but a hand gesture stopped her, and she abruptly fell silent. Because she called the Duke by his name, like in the village. His lordship turned around with the words that it was difficult to find a girl. If only she had known, she wouldn't have left his clinic. A smile appeared on his lips. He brought his hand to his chest. I breathed in the night air, exhaled the girl's name, closed my eyes. I didn't expect these feelings from myself. If she had only lived on his lands, many of the inhabitants of Karsha would not have died poisoned. The boy snapped out of his thoughts from the sound of hooves, tried to understand where it came from. And he was surprised. He ran towards the house, looked around, searching for the girl, with drops of sweat rolling down his face. But it was already too late. It was then that Dylan realized that they could only meet when he returned to where he wanted. His path was towards the lands of Karsha, where the man was supposed to arrive after finishing the trial. I found nothing to answer the Duke. I could only scream, remembering his words that he was not from these lands. He, who was not a noble of this empire, corrected the girl. He didn't take his hand from his chest, smiled sweetly, and was glad to meet her. They serve the same emperor, separated by borders, but move in the same secular society. I asked him directly about the rumors. She should have listened to them. I took a small step towards him. I knew it even before arranging this meeting. A calm voice sounded loud enough. The man stared intently. He didn't believe those rumors. They were based on lies. And finally gave his answer. Cecilia had already heard this, but everyone turned their backs on her when Count Lidin pressed them and provided false evidence to support the rumor. Then she became a woman who leads men by the nose. She told the Duke, who tried to interrupt her, but it didn't work. She hugged herself, her eyes filled with tears. They always tricked the girl when they said they believed. He approached decisively. Then he would prove it to her. She would stand in front of everyone and tell them that she knew him differently, not by rumors. She shook her head. No, it's not worth it. Nothing is needed. She bid farewell to the Duke, happy to see him again. Cecilia didn't realize how much she missed the young man. She would like to see and talk like that again. But that's all. She put an end to it, because he is the great Duke of Karsha. That is the man. I have often heard how the Duke is called the kindest and friendliest noble. The complete opposite of Cecilia. She clenched her hand into a fist. He clarified that the girl rejected him because of rumors, one facing the other, looking into each other's eyes. Their hearts yearned to meet. She looked up and nodded her head. She understood correctly. She didn't want her dirt to touch Dylan. She thanked him for the strength to live a little longer. But it was better to pretend to him that Cecilia didn't know him, even if it was bitter to utter such words. The lady turned around. She was about to leave. Last act of goodwill on her part. She would pretend not to know this man. The Duke held out his hand to her. He was seduced by Cecilia. He didn't want to break the bond between them. He tried to stop the girl from leaving. He stopped her. He took her by the shoulder. He understood the girl's fear. He was afraid of dragging her into his troubles and tried to find out the reason for her refusal. The Duke asked not to judge him, only because of the rumors. There is no need to make an ideal man. She blushed and narrowed her eyes. The Duke was too close, smiling, looking at her. Don't be surprised, but you will see each other at the banquet. There is no need to fear rumors. After the girl left, Dylan admitted to himself that he loved her not for the power that healed him, but for her gentle smile. He just wanted to take her with him to Karsha. He walked out the door, exhaled, closed his eyes. What was this man doing? He pulled his voice out of his thoughts and asked if they were finished. My hands clenched at the question of where to accompany me now. I didn't want to go to the banquet, but unpleasant things await me if I decide not to go. Already seated in the carriage, she drew back the curtain and looked towards the house. He will not pretend not to know her, Cecilia whispered affirmatively. A smile appeared on the girl's lips. She thought she would never see him again. That's why she is happy now. The carriage was taking a young lady away from the Duke, and she did not want to cause Dylan any harm, so it was better for them to stay as far away from each other as possible. Cecilia entered the banquet and immediately saw people in the hall turning to look at her. And there were laughter and whispers. Passing by women and men, I heard people talking about her, expecting a scandal from her. And it wasn't just the behavior, but also the appearance of the girl that affected her. She exhaled and heard the Marquis greeting someone, happy to have traveled a long way to his banquet. The man with the mustache was happy. He greeted the Duke as if he were an old friend and was holding glasses full of wine in his hands. He handed one of the glasses to the boy. The wine splashed and played with the light. His hand was extended. Dylan was about to take it. Immediately, everyone raised their glasses, including Cecilia, in honor of the greeting of the great Duke. Tiat approached the girl, lowered the wine glass. He was angry. It made no sense to repeat it in front of everyone. He told her quite rudely. He lowered the wine glass so much that it spilled onto his sister's dress. Seeing this, he muttered an apology. He shook his finger threateningly, and just in case, said not to even think about talking to the Duke. He moved away from her, but continued to mock her. She shouldn't take up the time of important people like that. She crossed her arms over her chest, hiding her wet sleeve. She looked at Dylan. She put the wine glass on the table. She had no intention of talking to him, not because of her brother's words, but because it would be better for them. She didn't want to set a trap for this man. It was better to remain strangers. The Duke noticed that the girl turned around and left. His gaze turned sad, watching her from the corner of his eye. She turned around, left. It was time to go home. She thought her stepmother would be very sad about returning from the banquet so early. That didn't stop her. Lost in thought, she didn't immediately notice the person in her way. Dylan didn't hold his wine glass and spilled a drop of red liquid on her. She exhaled, sat down, and began to dry the wine with her snow-white handkerchief, placing the glass beside her. He touched her legs with a barely perceptible movement. She heard that the girl likes to do different things in front of everyone. He suggested playing together. Nothing serious. She was ashamed. Her face turned red. Her eyes opened, and her breathing quickened. She clasped her hands. It was written on her face that the rumors were lies. But if they were true and she had deceived the Duke, it was fine. Remaining in the same position, she brought her hand to her chest. He is indifferent to rumors. This means that he loves Cecilia, no matter what. He confessed his feelings to her. She asked to go with him. The maid rushed over. She curtsied. Now she will clean up all the talk. No need to dirty your precious hands. The Marquis's face darkened and he shouted. The young man got up worried about Cecilia. He asked about her well-being and smiled sincerely. The Marquis nodded his head. A smile appeared on his lips and he said, "No need to worry about this lady." And immediately changing his face, he became cordial towards the Duke. He asked to go there and pointed in that direction with his hand. While the men were distracted, the girl hurried away. She needed to go home. She turned around and hurried so as not to be seen. Cecilia stopped, turned around, looked at the Duke, pretended not to have heard anything. Her cheeks flushed. Meeting Dylan's eyes, she got scared and couldn't look away. The boy was also looking, waiting for her future actions. The girl thought for only a second, but forced herself to refuse, closing the door. No, a terrible scandal awaits them, presenting the purest man and the most dissolute lady in the empire, as her stepmother argues. Her father and her Marquis. But this situation would simplify everything. Even being the most dissolute, no one would say a word about the mistress of the great Duke Karsha. Getting into the carriage, she lifted her skirt, gave the order to the driver, and headed to the Linden estate. She closed her eyes, exhaled. She would rather burn in this sadness than allow them to denigrate Dylan, the pure Duke. At the estate, the stepmother shouted at Cecilia loudly. The banquet had just begun, and the girl dared to crawl back. She forgot about the task, nervously waved her fan, and spat saliva. The whole woman was trembling with anger. She gripped her fan tightly in her hand. She also left Theoda alone. She was angry with her. She lowered her blonde head. She covered herself with what her stepmother poured on her, worried about the boy, because they might say rude things to him. She called the maids. She gave the order to clean the girl and lock her in the storeroom. They quickly rushed and were about to fulfill the girl's order. The maids took Cecilia away. The stepmother shouted at the girl, grabbing her fan. It was impossible to return to the room. It was worth thinking about the mistakes. Already in the hot bath, the girl combed her hair, thinking that it was better than setting a trap for Dylan. She would endure everything, and whether Theoda would stay at the banquet or not. A noise outside the door pulled her out of her thoughts. She put down the brush, stopped combing her hair, and listened. The stepmother burst into the girl's room, shouted nervously that she should hurry up and go out and put a pile of dresses in the maid's hands. The woman kept yelling to hurry up, not to stand there like a pillar. The girl needed help. Already closing the door, she spoke through the crack about an important guest, whom they must not keep waiting, and quickly gathered Cecilia and went to the guest room. The stepmother shouted at the girl again, already dressed in a pink dress. She caused trouble. What she had done was boiling with indignation. But when she heard who this important guest was, she screamed. She brought her hands to her mouth. The Duke arrived right here, and the lady was horrified. The stepmother accompanied Cecilia to the door, giving her instructions along the way. Begging for mercy right after entering were the woman's words. At that moment, the Duke was sitting serenely and drinking tea from a cup when he saw the girl. A smile lit up his face. He put the cup on the saucer, and the man came looking for answers he didn't receive at the banquet. especially because she had enough time to think about it. The Duke's question made Cecilia's eyes widen. Was she deceiving him or not? Waiting for an answer, he reached the girl. He made her believe that the rumors about her are not important to him, because he himself is not as pure as everyone seems. The boy doesn't seem to care about the consequences such actions might bring. He smiled as if he knew nothing about the scandal. To continue the conversation, the Duke took Cecilia by the hand and invited her to sit down first. The girl saw that the man sat down casually and started serving you in cups and addressed him formally. Hearing this, his lordship raised his head and shook it, closing his eyes without the need for formalities. Only Dylan, she tried to justify herself. Then she didn't know at all that he was a duke. The man laughed, made fun of the girl, and remembered how she hid his hands. He pushed the saucer towards her and told her that he didn't know what the Duke would do, but that Dylan had already forgiven her. She lowered her head, exhaled. She was worried about what people would say, trying to convey to the man that a relationship with her would be destructive. She grabbed the cup with trembling hands. She doesn't know what it's like in the Empire, but in high society, the dirt will remain. She won't get rid of it, she said bitterly. He listened to the girl, nodded his head. The Empire is boiling with disgusting rumors, and he whispered with understanding. Then, placing his palm on Cecilia's small palm, what did she think of Karsha? The Duke asked directly. He brought his hand to his lips, looked him straight in the eyes, and made her an offer she didn't expect to receive. If she wanted to become the wife of the young Duke of Karsha, it came from him. She didn't believe it, she asked again, but her eyes were already lighting up at such a proposal. She asked several times, as if she didn't believe what she had heard. Dylan had no desire to leave Cecilia in this pit of mud and danger. He raised his eyes. If you fear for her reputation, let him tell everyone that he held onto the girl until the end. She blushed from such a fiery speech, took his hand, approached him, and asked him to pretend that she had given up and leave with him. Cecilia thought, there are 3 poisonous snakes in Karsha, but it will still be better than staying here. And only now did she realize that the great Duke had made her an offer to become his wife. She opened her mouth, and a blush appeared on her cheeks. If she accepts it, she will be able to get rid of the rumors. Her hand fell into his, but doubts and questions tormented the young woman. She didn't understand why the Duke would go this far for her. She remembered their conversation from the night. She could find someone she trusted. Doubts did not leave the girl. It seemed the matter was in his gift, as the Duke mentioned wanting to know secrets. He drank tea and had no idea about the torment of his beloved. She interrupted herself and interrupted her thoughts. She didn't understand why she kept fearing the one sitting in front of her, who said he completely trusted her. Still, she started the conversation by saying that, first of all, she should ask the vassal's opinion on whether they would be allowed to marry. She brought her hand to her chest, lowered her head. They will support the wedding with Cecilia Liddon, repeated the girl. He looked at her sideways for a long time, as if discussing something. She squeezed his hand and looked at the man, if he could change his mind. Then now is the time. Her cheeks turned red. She didn't want someone she trusted to betray her. Dylan put the cup on the saucer. He was sure that his vassals would be against it. Hearing this, she lowered her gaze. Her answer meant nothing. Then Cecilia started speaking. But the boy interrupted her. Everything is fine. He looked at the bride and explained that he doesn't always listen to what those poisonous snakes tell him, especially about relationships. She brought her hand to her lips. He looked with a clear gaze. They just need to get married. He said, while cutting, he won't accept any revival. It was surprising that a man needed such a slutty woman. She asked again. She didn't fully believe it. There was fear, so the girl asked if she would be free to breathe the night air. Assured the Duke, promising her that all of that would be possible. She placed her palm on Dylan's palm, admitted, and honestly, she missed him very much too. Words of recognition came out. If Cecilia manages to get out of the place where everyone considers her a villain, then she will agree to marry the Duke. She screamed and looked with eyes shining with moisture. He bowed his head, touched the delicate skin with his lips. Soon the girl will be the wife of His Highness. She closed her eyes with pleasure. In his absence, she will be a representative. She will act on behalf of the Duke. Cecilia's father met the knight. He conveyed His Majesty's words that he would prefer to see them and looked for them. When they entered the guest room, they bowed, asking for their daughter's apologies. They would talk to her, and this would not happen again, without even listening to the man. Throwing his jacket over the girl's shoulders, he looked at her with love. Everything was fine. She was definitely fine. The father started sweating. He shouted, didn't understand what was happening here and frowned threateningly. They stared dumbfounded at the couple, who couldn't take their eyes off each other. The girl agreed, after much persuasion, to accept his proposal. Angry, the stepmother tightly clenched the fan in her hands. A crack was heard. She asked what kind of proposal they were talking about. She couldn't believe her stepsister was being offered marriage. The Duke ordered his assistant to hurry and call the flower carriage. He must not keep the lady waiting. Count Liddon didn't understand. He tried to be indignant that some kind of mistake had occurred here, and it was worth investigating. But the man interrupted him. Everyone understood everything correctly. Dylan looked at the girl tenderly. Soon she would become the Duchess of Karsha. Leaving them alone, at the Duke's request, from behind the closed door, one could hear how happy he was that the girl would soon be in Karsha. The happy Cecilia turned her face towards him. Her eyes were shining. She was happy, and now she was also waiting for this moment. I noticed how the boy's face changed. A drop of sweat rolled down his cheek. She became sad and apologized for only now talking about it. Karsha is different from the Empire, Dylan warned her, but the girl was not surprised. She knew it. Although Karsha swore allegiance to the Emperor, and the secular circles are in contact, cultural differences have not disappeared because they are different nations. And in those lands, there are people who are disturbed by the Duke, who turns around and looks away. They act much more rudely, and they are not so easy to control. 3 people, an old man, a boy, and a girl. Cecilia exclaimed. She remembered Dylan's wound and could not believe that it was inflicted by one of them. The man laughed. His fiancée turned out to be not only beautiful, but also intelligent. The girl was embarrassed. She said those things. It was unusual. He said that he was indeed poisoned with poison at home. The boy confided to Tiara. He approached Cecilia. The antidote was a secret. In general, this family is not the only one that can cause them problems, the man finished. With time, she learns about the garden the man will lead her to. The dangers there are different from those in the Empire. The Duke made a promise that, no matter what, he could be fully trusted. And his people. He held out his hand to the woman, inviting her to go with him in the flower carriage, smiling, waiting for an answer. It seemed as if she wasn't breathing. And the girl put her palm in his, gave her consent, and would travel with him in the carriage. There was a knock on the door, distracting the couple from their conversations. Mia notified that the flower carriage had almost arrived. Hand in hand, they were about to leave and go to a new place for Cecilia. They briefly shouted the answer. The man looked at the carriage and tried to justify himself by saying that there was little time to prepare. Although it looked unattractive, it was difficult to prepare everything. The girl was impressed, opened her mouth and looked at the carriage, the same one that was talked about a lot in secular society. Cecilia turned her face towards the boy. She was very happy. It was a dream to travel in such a carriage. She didn't believe she could ride in it. The smile disappeared from her face in an instant and darkened as soon as she heard a voice asking that the great Duke was leaving the estate too soon. The entire Liddon family came out onto the street. She curtsied, but their faces were sweaty, angry. If His Highness had stayed longer, they would have shown more cordiality, said the girl's father. The man understood that they were falling and were hypocritical towards those who were stronger than them. But he behaved disgustingly towards those who were weaker. He couldn't get over his disgust for them and said that his fiancée had no desire to stay here even for a second. The flower carriage is already here, so the man wouldn't want to stay on this land. He looked at the girl. A smile immediately appeared on his face. Her eyes immediately shone with joy. They needed to hit the road. They turned around and left. The man plans to listen to his fiancée in everything. The father shouted. He started talking about the dowry, but no one heard his shouts. They looked at each other. The young man cared about the girl's opinion. Whatever she decided, him too. Before Cecilia had time to answer, her stepmother called her, expecting everything to be fine for her. The woman smiled, which caused surprise. The girl became sad. It was strange to observe such a reaction in her, because she didn't even consider her a person. She remembered all the grievances. The Duke's hand touched the bride's cheek and asked her not to force herself to smile, not to waste energy. He looked at her with a gentle smile. Those people can no longer cause harm. He gently stroked the skin with his thumb. Tiat also could not remain silent. He raised his hands, wished his sister a good journey, and spoke of meeting her at the banquet. The brother could master dark magic from an early age and justified his attacks on the girl with vile insects as a practice that she did not have the gift for, so she had to endure bullying. The banquets where they needed to cover up were disgusting. The spilled wine was not the worst of it. Due to the rumors spread by the stepmother, everyone looked at Thaude with sympathy only, not suspecting how she really was. Cecilia was a troubled sister, tormented by one scandal after another. She addressed her fiancé and clarified that when she attended the banquet, she would be the Duchess of Karsha, from which he received consent that everything was correct. He took a lock of white hair and promised that no one would belittle her anymore. Everyone would take the girl's opinion into account. She brought her hair to her lips, closed her eyes. Her honor would become his honor, his power would become hers. He turned to his brother and said threateningly, without a hint of a smile, "If they meet, you heard everything." Now the Duchess should address her. Everyone was scared. The stepmother couldn't believe what she saw, that this very Cecilia could intimidate someone, even in such a threatening manner. As he seated the bride, her fiancé carefully supported her. The woman looked and remembered that when she told the girl to leave, she always obeyed. And she left. She was trash to the Lidden family, the one who couldn't even use the family's dark magic. I told the assistant that he needed to close the carriage doors, and I started to understand what kind of life the girl had here. The stepmother was horrified. Everything she knew about Cecilia Lidden was a lie. She simply kept her head down because she didn't have enough strength. The carriage took the girl away from the estate, from this house where they didn't need her. It didn't feel like home. There was no warmth in this place. She looked out the window. Doubts crept inside. Everything will be fine, the girl assured herself, feeling fear of the new world. Dylan smiled and tried to calm the girl. All her worries were in vain. There was no need to be nervous. The Duke felt ashamed, but he approached and his lips touched the girl's forehead. She closed her eyes and the bride lit up like a match. She warmed up. She would never return to this place. She listened to him and completely believed that everything was already over for her. Now only the best will come. The woman in red exclaimed loudly, clenching her fists, that a flower carriage was coming from the outskirts of the city. Covered in sweat, the servant replied that he would soon be at the garden entrance. He squeezed his hand fearfully, afraid of being punished for such a denunciation. The dark-haired man shouted. He leaned towards him. He couldn't accept that the Duke had a foreign bride, but Tiara had already prepared her own bride. The woman agreed. All wives were from his own land, so the Tyre family should be next. The blonde old man was indignant. The man lowered his head and clenched his teeth. He did everything he could to get rid of Dylan in this trial. Reed Henia, Helen Sidey, and Kedden Tyre, heads of 3 families who usually kept their distance. They gathered a few months ago to choose a new great duke. Stroking his long white beard, closing his eyes, already the 3rd Duke of Dylan's house. They didn't like all of this very much. If he takes this place, then their family won't be able to defeat him, which is why the 3 heads have gathered today to solve this problem. The dark-haired man crossed his arms over his chest. Everyone understands what needs to be done. Testing the air will be their opportunity. A smile appeared on the lips. They were going to instruct the candidates from their families to unite and kill Dylan. After the trials began, a snow-white dove flew to the window with a message for that dark-haired man. Opening the message, he read every line. His son wrote that he had succeeded and that he was proud of himself. They united, as they were told, and Dylan was poisoned with Tyre poison. The guy lay face down on the floor. The poison began to take effect. He put his hand on the letter. If you believe the message, then the young man is already dead. So we must decide who will become the next new duke. Those sitting in front of him nodded their heads. They were happy that the alliance was to exterminate the young man. But the first person to return to Karsha territory was Dylan, who was initially poisoned with Tyre poison. The boss cursed his idiot son. The rest exhaled heavily. They were not particularly happy with the news. He crossed his arms over his sword and needed to stop the carriage before it reached the Central Park. The woman lowered her head. It was already too late to hitch the horses. They would only see his carriage enter. He turned around to break the unwritten rule about choosing a bride from the Tyre family. He brought a foreigner. The woman was outraged. She smiled. It became grim. She needed to know the details. An opportunity to attack would suddenly arise, the angry lady thought out loud. She raised her hand. They are preparing to go to the central castle. This garden grows every year. It grows bigger and bigger. The woman ran towards the exit. She knew the man would think she was going there. She thought about all the Duke's actions. The flower carriage arrived right up to the door, and Dylan quietly called the girl by her name. Lifting her head from her fiancé's shoulder, Cecilia woke up. She hadn't fully recovered from sleep yet, so she didn't think very fast. She jumped up scared that they had arrived so quickly. The boy turned to her and warned her that she first had to do something before they entered the lands. From the view from outside the wagon, you will immediately understand how dangerous this place is. The man said. She looked out the window and saw that all the plants here were poisonous. She got scared. A drop of sweat rolled down her cheek, and the Duke distracted her from her thoughts. Who asked for her hand? She looked at her hands. Her palms turned red and burns appeared on the girl's delicate skin. Dylan carefully put gloves on his hands and warned that she would have to wear them for a while. I also hung a beautiful veil over my face. I also need to cover my face. All this is temporary. I tied it in a bun. He explained that everything is in the air, and the fabric protects and purifies the air. Otherwise, marks will remain. Like on the palms, she listened very attentively. The Duke informed his knights that they were ready. They could open the doors. He took note and ran so they could pass through. And Mia ordered the horses to move forward. They sat on the beam and headed to the Duke's land. Cecilia saw the place where the knights were. These were all Dylan's lands, flowers and trees. Everything was in bloom, a very large area. She raised her head. The Duke smiled and confirmed that all belonged to his Radhika family. The terrain opposite, which is dotted with bright red flowers, is ruled by the Sadie family. And the young man explained the entire structure in detail. There are 4 more, Kenia and Tyre, but the entire territory of Karsha belongs to Dylan. He looked to the side and seemed to be thinking about her words. She looked intently at her fiancé. Members of other families could also claim the position of Great Duke. Cecilia realized. In response to the man's question, she waved her hands, denying it and saying that all this was different from the empire. The carriage moved forward. Dylan was worried about her. If she would be all right, he was worried about the appearance of many enemies. Becoming serious, the Duke said that the 3 families want him dead and that their goal is to take his life. Don't worry, they only need him. Cecilia opened her eyes, surprised by such a story. With the previous Duke and Duchess dead, only Dylan remains on the path to power. And the Empire is about to announce that a side branch of the family will rule the duchy. She closed her eyes. Now she understood why the boy was so sure that only he would be attacked. These are unknown lands. And Dylan, the only person she already knew, looked into his eyes with expectation and concern. She crossed her arms. She had to walk with those uncomfortable gloves. But still, it was better than staying in the house that was her home. A home without heating. Everything is fine. There were poisonous snakes in this world. They only bit the girl, I thought. She approached Dylan and whispered to him, smiling. She won't run away. She promises surely that he trusts her in everything. He raised his finger pointing upwards while smiling at the girl and noticed that they had already arrived. He pointed to the central castle where they would live. The lights were on in the windows. They were waiting for their arrival, preparing. Dylan and Cecilia were arm in arm and looked at the castle. Every corner here can be changed to their liking, as their soul desires. I also noticed something where everyone was running and trying to cover this place. And I thought of the chaos. Some kind of fire, trying to make it out. She stretched her head. Dylan noticed it and exhaled sharply. All this was unexpected for them. The uninvited guests were already here. The trio stood up and waited expectantly for a reaction, with a blonde old man at the front, a woman and a man on each side. The boy didn't think they would react quickly and arrive. Cecilia saw the colors on the robes. They were enemies. She understood and didn't know how to behave, whether to greet or not. Dylan turned to her. Now you must listen to him carefully, since she came with him in a flower carriage. Now she is Lady Cartilla's bride. The trio was angry. A dark aura flew from them. The young man also noticed that they did not like this situation. He took her hands in his. He reminded her that Cecilia should be taller than all of them and carefully took her hands. He whispered with concern that only the Roddick family deserved trust. There was no smile. Everything had been discussed very seriously. He still had Cecilia's hands in his hands. Then this place would not turn into a nightmare, and the castle would burn and wait for its owner. The Duke and Duchess have the right not to greet them, which they did, leaving the trio behind. But they looked at them, which infuriated the men. They completely ignored me, boiling with indignation, soaked in cold sweat from so much humiliation. The woman realized that the girl was covering her face because she was not immune to pollen, and not because she wanted to hide it. The knight brought his hand to his chest and informed the uninvited guests that his lordship was not in the mood to receive anyone today. The man's hands trembled. The Duke's impudence surprised him. His elders thought he was too young and short-tempered. He nodded his head, barely restraining himself, cursed. The milk on his lips hadn't dried, but he behaved as if the great duke could do anything. He shouted and turned his head. The woman in red tried to explain to the servant that the family head's knowledge was not obvious, since the duke had brought a foreign bride. The knight reacted calmly to this attack and expressed his lordship's will that everything would be postponed for 3 full days. I couldn't control my emotions. The first boss raised his hand. A blue glow gathered at the tip of my fingers, and I started to be rude to the knight, who was also the duke's cousin. He also shouted that they had broken the rule and taken a foreigner as a bride. And not from the Tyre family. The dark-haired man stared back. A red blush appeared on the young servant's cheeks. He said goodbye to them and wished them a good journey back. The knight turned around, preparing to leave, but words were thrown at him from behind. The first boss called him a bastard who irritates with his politeness. They occupied this castle for generations, so they became completely arrogant. They raised their noses and pierced the sky with it. The bosses regretted missing that opportunity during the trial. Their sons are now hiding so as not to be found. The dark-haired man, the head of the Tyre clan, doesn't even know the location of his stupid son after the message. The trio looked at each other. There was nothing more to do here. There was a decision to return. The men nodded their heads. Clenching their fists, they left. They would have to wait until he found his son. The head of Tyre turned to look at the castle. He would find a way to get rid of the duke. He promised, gritting his teeth. He was already anticipating how they would organize another trial for the heirs, and that his son would be the most important one there. Dylan Roddick dared to look down at the members of the bosses. The man must pay for everything, the man thought resolutely. He whispered in the ear of an approaching servant that he needed to bribe someone from the duke's entourage. And he found out everything. I decided to teach the great duke a lesson, so he would understand that he couldn't handle anything in the garden alone. That he alone was weak. He brought his hand to his mouth, hiding a laugh. He was curious how long the foreign bride would last. He turned and no longer hiding his smile. He thought that if the guy wanted to save the stranger, he would have to bow his head. Dylan carefully circled Cecilia's waist. It was time for them to enter. She followed him confidentially. She glanced at the people. Everything would be fine if they simply got up and left. Now the lady was worried about this. The duke said the meeting had been postponed for 3 days. It would be difficult to deal with them when they were so tired. The woman agreed with such arguments. Dylan looked around. His fury could be felt even here. But the enemy had to be prepared. He understood that the matter was on him because he did not accept the bride from the Tyre house. An incredibly stupid reason for anger, but they were still angry. There was never any intention to give him the chance to manipulate the Roddick family. Now, this is also related to the safety of his fiancée. He turned to the girl. She will meet them when she gets more information. She didn't even know the names of these chapters, so now she is not a particularly good assistant. So I will have to wait for now. When we entered the central castle, Cecilia stopped and shouted with joy. She had never seen such a large and beautiful room, but her attention was drawn to the fact that some things seemed missing from the room. Everyone was running, busy with something. The girl suggested that a decoration change was taking place in the castle. She looked out the window. There were some people there. She asked the duke about the fire outside. She didn't let this question go. The duke calmly explained that all the flower beds had burned down. The girl was horrified and looked at him fearfully. She jumped to the window, looked out, saw a pile of ash in the street. Cecilia was upset and worried about the flower garden, trying to figure out if everything was burnt. But the boy's hand stopped her, hugging and calming her at the same time. She rested her head on his chest, dangerously close to the window. There is nothing to worry about. No one was hurt. The duke encouraged his fiancée. Hearing what the boy said, she opened her eyes in surprise. He himself admitted that he started the fire. In this garden, there was a large amount of poisonous plants that could cause great harm to people. For safety, Dylan resorted to this method. The lady realized it was because of her. He distracted her from sad thoughts. The young man invited her inside and to show her her room. Letting her into the room, the duke smiled and pleased her that in this room Cecilia would not have to wear a mask. There was clean air and no danger. My hands flew to the mask. I took it off, closed my eyes, even the breathing here improved. The air was different and my thoughts were lighter now. Dylan instructed to prepare all the necessary furniture and has the right to change everything in this room at her discretion. Tears fell from the girl's eyes. She pressed the handkerchief to her chest. She squeezed it tightly. She was embarrassed and her cheeks flushed. Surprised by her exclamation of disbelief, he turned and looked at her with his mouth open, asking her if she would definitely become the Duchess of Cartilla. Won't they drag her back to the Count? She asked, stuttering. This room resembles the one at the Lytton estate. Freedom can end in an instant. The man calmly placed his hand on his head. She has walked this path. This will not happen again. She will be by his side. In 3 days, unwanted guests will arrive. But in the meantime, she needs to bring all the things she really needs. The moment Cecilia needs to return to the estate will not come. Lytton took her hands to calm her. In other words, the young man approached the girl. She blushed, it was hot, and he would never let her go. The Duke himself was embarrassed, but continued. Cecilia herself came to this terrible place, so she could not escape. Trinity, the 3 chapters will definitely want the girl to leave, but don't be afraid. They will fight to the end. He placed his hand on the girl. The safest snake in the garden is the Duke, so she must always stay close. Light incense is lit in this room to purify the air, so it is better for her to stay here. When the necessary steps are completed, all of Karsha will know that the girl has become Dylan's official wife. The leaders did not like Dylan's choice, and it was no secret. They may call the girl strange and try to hurt her, but you have to be prepared. He brought his hand to his chest. The Duke loves everything he doesn't like. He laughed, calming the girl. Cecilia had already accepted the proposal, so the wedding was already predetermined. He seemed happy at this thought. He turned around, decided to let his fiancée rest, and said goodbye with a smile. The girl was already asleep, eyes closed, breathing peacefully, and thus ended the first day in the Cartilla Duchy. It was unusual to see the palace moving in the morning. Noise and clatter could be heard everywhere. The maids ran in different directions. A scream came from the bride's quarters. They needed a doctor. She was covered in red burns and soaked. The girl struggled in agony, without opening her eyes. The young doctor nervously adjusted his glasses. He didn't understand that everything was arranged with poisonous plants. He was worried. The maid brought him here because the girl in the flower carriage was feeling unwell. I remembered what happened this morning. I looked at the suffering Cecilia. I thought that hair color was hard to find in their duchy. Then I realized she was a foreigner. He sat down on a chair next to her. In her hand, she held tender skin with a burn. Everything was already burnt, and her skin still reacted very badly. She also had a fever. Apparently, she had inhaled small particles, and he abruptly got up from his chair, as if he knew what else could be done. Dylan unexpectedly appeared and scared the young doctor with his question about her well-being, who hesitantly replied that there was no danger to her life. He turned around and tried to explain to him that all the bride's symptoms were the same as those that kindergarten children have in childhood. A slight allergy. He put his hand on his chin and wondered if he really thought it was an allergy, like a skin disease in small children. Many are born with high resistance to poisons. There are exceptions. Some are sensitive to local air. The doctor recalled that Mian is also the same. The Duke blamed himself that he should have prepared in advance. His thoughtfulness did not leave him. Even if you burn all the plants on the estate, the air of the garden itself is different from the real one. But Cecilia's symptoms were a bit more severe. The person added, since she was not born here. The doctor pointed to the blanket under which the girl was covered, which was made of garden materials. The Duke did not foresee this. He waved his hands and urgently ordered to take it off and bring a silver blanket. Seeing the maid carrying out his instructions, he couldn't even imagine that the veil would have such an effect. He lamented. The silver fabric was also made of garden materials. He doesn't know how her skin will react. His eyes were moist with worry. Even cleaning the air in the room did not help. I headed towards the exit. He needed to find other ways. Firmly closing the door to the room and ordering her to notify him when she woke up. The doctor stayed with the patient. The young man scratched the top of his head. He didn't understand why the knight was so nervous today. The reason was not clear. The Roddick family has always been resistant to poisons, but Dylan himself never suffered from skin diseases, and he was the most resistant. There was even a case where a bribed maid gave a poisoned lunch to a child. He ate it all without even stopping. It became a kind of story, but not everyone in the Roddick family was like that. His cousin Mian suffered from a skin disease. The young man was worried about what happened to the lady they brought, but Mia assured him that everything was much better now. They just made a big fuss about it. The knight understood that the girl they transported in the flower carriage was not just anyone, but the future Duchess of Karsha, and that was for sure. The Duke's cousin uses a special grass. Only in this way can he walk calmly, as the grass blocks the effect of pollen. His sister, Mia, was more resistant. Her resistance was close to Dylan's. He covered his nose. The smell of grass wasn't particularly pleasant. The poor young man shed a tear because of the wound. He needed to chew harder, but he wasn't happy about it. It was unusual for the girl to call a stranger a lover. They received an order from the Duke to watch his family, those mages. He turned to the bookshelf. Mian was trying to find information, muttering the girl's surname. Suddenly he stopped and shouted. The man was distracted by a noise. He glanced sideways. There had been some trouble since the morning. Mia just wanted to check what was happening there. She grabbed the door handle when she heard a scream that the girl wanted to commit suicide. At that moment, Dylan sat calmly in his office and sorted through the letters, reading them and putting them aside according to their importance. But he couldn't concentrate on work. The image of a girl lying in bed appeared in his head. Alarmed, Mian ran to the office. He loudly called the Duke, nervous and sweaty. Something very bad had happened. Dylan demanded silence, but his brother interrupted him by shouting that his fiancée wanted to commit suicide. A few minutes before the suicidal situation, the maids changed all the bedding in the girls' room. Among them, the girls decided what else was worth doing. They cleaned the room. They put things in order and replenished the herbs to purify the air. Cecilia got up without opening her eyes and started scratching the parts of her body that were red. The maids immediately rushed to her, competing with each other, and started saying it was better not to scratch. The loud scream of the girls frightened she. The doctor smiled and waved his hand. It was just a fever that would pass after a little rest. Cecilia sat on the bed and listened to the girls say that they had changed the linen for a silver cloth, that it had a good effect on the skin. Many poisonous plants grow here in the duchy, and it seems that one of them made the lady turn red. She brought her hand to her mouth. They must have herbs to get the opposite effect. The girl asked them to bring the Athena herb and explained to the discouraged maids that this plant has little use, but that there is always a small amount. The girls looked at each other frightened, covered in sweat. They anxiously asked the Duke's bride what she wanted to do with this herb. As soon as the maids learned that she wanted to use Athena on herself, their faces darkened and they screamed in horror. Surprised by the reaction, I sat on the bed and didn't understand where the girls ran off screaming. The maid bowed, screaming and crying, which she didn't like, when the door burst open, and the frightened Duke rushed in. The sweaty and anxious boy, hesitantly, asked the girl why and what she needed this herb for. Not only Dylan, but all the knights also rushed into the room. The girl got soaked. She didn't understand what caused this reaction. She realized everyone was scared by her request for grass, but she needed it for her allergies to disappear. She explained to those gathered there. He jumped towards his fiancée. He took her hands in his. He tried to find out what was wrong with her. Maybe he had offended her. The boy had already assumed everything. Mia and Mian started whispering. They had never seen Dylan like this. He was always serene in front of them. But suddenly, he changed dramatically. The man's hands were trembling. He couldn't stand it, and with a trembling voice, he asked Cecilia why she wanted to use hallucinogenic herbs. She opened her mouth. She didn't understand everyone. It seemed strange to her, and he decided to clarify how the Athena herb was used here in Karsha. The Duke's face darkened, and he barely whispered that this herb is used to stop living, to interrupt life, for elderly people on the verge of death or terminally ill patients who can no longer endure the pain. The plant causes pleasant hallucinations until their breath is cut off. The girl burst out laughing, so she apologized to everyone. The reasons for such strange behavior became clear to her. She wiped a tear from her eye with her finger. She didn't even suspect such an effect from this plant. She assured him that everything was fine. She raised her hand and asked permission to show what this herb is capable of. If you rub it on the burn site, it will relieve the allergic reaction. You can bring Athena now. The maid nodded her head. She bowed deeply. It is ready to leave. The girl brought the herb. She washed it under running water, everything as the lady asked. She placed the piece of paper in his hand, reciting each of her actions. It should help now. She showed her hand to everyone in the room. Almost gone, Cecilia shouted with joy. The knights and the maid exhaled, looking dumbfounded. There was no more redness. Dylan shook his head, because no one knew about such an effect of the herb. He shook his head when asked to tell how to use it to cause hallucinations. But he didn't want to say. No matter how the girl tried to persuade him. He stood firm and sent his knights to work, because they are not waiting. Being left alone, Dylan glanced at his fiancée, so as not to escape, she remembered. She approached the boy barefoot. She didn't need it. She simply got out of that nightmare, the girl assured. She pressed her cheek against the man's hand. She felt embarrassed and smiled sincerely, because there was a person who was on her side. Dylan was angry. Nothing would work. She could not let herself be seduced. He wouldn't tell her anything. The girl laughed. I exhaled. Now I realized that she wouldn't commit suicide, but I understood one very important thing. He wouldn't let her go for anything. She looked at her hands. It almost drove him crazy, because of the time they spent apart until they met again at the banquet. If he ever loses Cecilia, he doesn't know how he will live without her. That's why he didn't want to say how Athena acts. The girl exclaimed. She raised her finger. She didn't know how to achieve such an effect. But this plant has limited methods for processing the plant. You can cook it in boiling water, grind it, mix it with other plants. I described these methods. Or burn the dry one. The girl began to think aloud, but the boy put a finger to her lips, silencing her. It was still difficult for Dylan to restrain his emotions. He tried not to show them until the end. If the other families find out that the Duke truly loves Cecilia, honestly, problems will begin. The girl turned around. She resolutely wanted to find out the truth. What method of marijuana has such an effect that she would do it herself? In the end, the Duke gave in. Sun rays took over the room, and the guy told her what to do with the grass. Cecilia took her hand away from her lips, smiled. Dylan's words sounded too simple, and she opened her eyes in anticipation. The man exhaled, closed his eyes. He admitted that he got very scared when she asked about Athena. He didn't even want to think about what would happen if something happened. If she was still locked up in that estate, then she would have a different answer. But not now, when there are people who are worried and will help in difficult times. She is embarrassed. She has no reason to harm herself, so don't worry, everything will be fine. He leaned down, pressed his forehead against hers. He would still hide the Athena leaf from her. The girl laughed. The itching could return. If this happens again, let her call Dylan and take care of every part of her body with joy. The heat burned her cheeks. She looked at the floor, thinking who called this man innocent. They were mistaken in this. He approached the girl. Well, he was glad that it was all a misunderstanding. Otherwise, he couldn't even imagine what could happen. Cecilia was tired of sitting in the room for a while, answering the Duke's question with a nod of her head. A walk wouldn't hurt. Dylan bothered her by turning her head side to side. He couldn't know what would happen in the corridor, if even the cloth was causing harm. Upon learning that there was a rhotic plant in the corridor, she clarified that the boy was not talking about family. But this was a name for the family and the poisonous plant, also called the rhotic seductress. Not even gloves and a mask could completely block the smell that had seeped into every corner of the castle. Hearing the name of the flower, she thought, she became curious to know what effect it had. And she sighed. She raised her head. She asked the leaving young man. If they were poisoned, they would obey the will of the family. She heard the answer to her question. Placing his hand on his chest, he will obey the one from whom pure blood flows, the head of the clan. She exclaimed cheerfully. If it was him, there was nothing to fear. She opened her eyes and expected nothing bad from the Duke. Closing her eyes, the naive one thought about her fiancé. She didn't know what she could ask of him, even of her. At least it won't cause harm. The girl was confused by this answer. Dylan didn't understand what that meant. It won't hurt her. There won't be that horror. I'm sure. I completely trusted my fiancé. There will be no threats. No one will force her to do anything against her will anymore. He took her cheeks in his palms. He smiled. He listened without interrupting Cecilia and waited for her to say something else. But when he heard that the girl was locked in the basement so she wouldn't go anywhere, he exhaled as if he couldn't do any harm. Putting his finger to her lips, you cannot allow the girl to be poisoned by the flower. She won't let you go anywhere. The lady must be free. When he took his finger off her lips, bright scarlet blood began to flow. There was so much that it was dripping. She bit her finger. The girl brought her hand closer, screamed, feared for the man, and assured him that everything was fine, and that there was nothing to worry about. The question surprised Zai. The Duke asked about the secret. He shuddered and shook his head, remembering the incident when the girl saved him, but before she could finish, she was trapped in a man's strong arms. If the family flower poisons her, she will be forced to tell her secret, even if the Duke desperately wants it, but still not worth it. Then keep the secret forever, the girl clarified, because the man wants to know. He said it himself. What Dylan said made Cecilia's cheeks turn red and hot, and he would give her his blood so that the effect of the flower would not be harmful. The girl smelled a strange, sweet smell. She touched her mouth with her hand. The Duke's blood was an antidote. She shook her head, looked away. The girl said everything correctly. It was him. His fiancée scolded him because he shouldn't reveal his secrets like that. But the boy calmed him down. She wouldn't tell anyone. He trusted him. Of course, she has no such intentions. But anyway, suddenly, no one can predict it. She laughed. A man has no other choice. If this is the price of love, then he is ready. She is ashamed and closes her eyes. He raised his finger to the girl's lips. Now she has resistance to the erotic effect, too intimate. The characters were embarrassed, blushing, the only person who could refuse the Duke. Changes were not long in coming. The air became lighter. Maybe, Shah suggested. Along with Dylan's blood, she became more resistant to poisons. Indeed, the girl found many poisons while treating people, but local poisons were on another level. Perfect! And the man confirmed that, among all other plants, the Radica flower has a very strong smell. If you inhale it, the person comes under control. If there is some kind of ventilation or something, it won't work. He muttered as he carefully wiped the blood from his mouth with a napkin. The Duke was leaving. His family had owned this castle for a long time. The smell of the flower filled every corner of this building. Dylan returned with a flower in his hands. He showed the flower to the fiancée as it was. It was easy to find in this place. She turned towards him, hugging herself. The girl realized that everything here was under the Duke's control. He placed a pot with blue flowers on the table and confirmed the girl's words. The more they inhale the smell, the easier it is to control them. The annoyed Cecilia looked at him. In her eyes was a question, which she asked, something he had already ordered his people to do. He took a step towards her, stopped of course, he could have done it, for the sake of the fiancée's safety. But he is interested in having different people, with their own character near him. He hoped they would replace his flaws, but if the Duke did not control every action, then they would be happy and sincerely help him. He smiled, reminding the girl that this place was different from where Cecilia lived. Very different. If a traitor appears, Dylan will simply cut him to pieces. He will use a bit of cruelty, he thought. He took her hand and brought it to his lips. Besides, he wanted the girl to love him of her own free will. He leaned towards Cecilia, smiled, and that's why he gave her his blood. Without lifting her head, she was embarrassed. The heat stuck to her body. He put his hand on her shoulder and squeezed it a little. He began to say that if his desires ever disturbed the girl, he would stop. It became dark. He said in a muffled voice that then it was necessary to burn the man to the ground. This is the punishment he chose for himself. She exclaimed. She didn't understand what Dylan was saying. It seemed like he wasn't listening to the words. He leaned over the girl. How much did he desire her? How long had the man been suffering this thirst? He couldn't tell the fiancé because he was afraid of scaring her. He touched the corner of her lips with his finger. Cecilia's eyes opened, without looking away. Her heartbeat increased. Having controlled himself, he overcame all desires. He touched the girl's forehead and left her a barely perceptible kiss. He separated from Zai, blushed, and if he couldn't cope with his desires, he repeated what needed to be done. For him, Radica, which touched the pot, is a weapon that allows him to use other people. He plucked a flower and brought it to his face. Besides, this plant is also his weakness. If you damage the flower, she will also suffer, so the flower caught fire, just like the skin on his hand. Seeing what happened to his hand, Cecilia screamed and rushed towards him horrified, but he calmed her down and told her that nothing terrible had happened. Stretching his hand forward, he showed that he was fine. It was a single flower. The girl stopped surprised. He gave the advice that if the girl is scared or feels lonely, then she needs to burn more grass in this land. He bowed his head and smiled. Now Cecilia knew all his secrets. She also knew his weaknesses. He did not regret telling her. She touched her cheek with her hand and simply realized that she could trust him, and that now he could not imagine his life without her. He gave her a kiss, squeezing into her arms, absorbed in each other. If he doesn't make Zai happy, then it's better for the man to disappear forever. The full moon illuminated the Duke's estate. There were lights in some windows. Discussions were loud, and many questions were asked. The woman, who was one of the heads of the family, read a report about the Duke's fiancée. About her weak resistance to poisons, the list was impressive. In the lands of Cartilla, there has long been a history of enmity between 4 families. But for the first time, it is a confrontation of 3 against 1. The reason is that the balance was upset when the Roddick family occupied the leadership position 3 times. Even the central castle began to be called the Roddick family castle, as if it had always been so. What irritated the others the most was that the last duke stopped considering them, and he did everything according to his own judgment. The woman bowed to everyone present. This completed her report. Now she will return to her place. The white-haired old man exhaled. Dylan didn't even try to hide his actions. It drove him crazy. We remember all the actions of the great duke, how he took the fiancée in a flower carriage, and immediately took her to the central castle. In addition, they also chased away the guests, because the fiancé was tired, and they sent a servant to refuse the meeting. Even after burning the flower beds, the woman still didn't understand that if the fiancé couldn't even stand the pollen from the garden, it would be of little use. She asked the question floating in the air. For what purpose did he choose a foreign fiancé? There were no signs of strong magic in the girl, so the chapters were guessing today. So the woman suggested that maybe Dylan had simply fallen in love. Silence fell. Everyone reflected on the words. The first to laugh was the one who suggested this. This is not possible, and he exclaimed. She smiled maliciously. She couldn't believe she had made such an assumption. The image of Dylan and love are incompatible things. They said that one day, while chasing an evil spirit that appeared on Roddick's lands. The group split into two parts, and the Duke could only save one. He didn't even hesitate. He didn't regret it when he had to leave injured people behind. Cruelty is present in him. Abandoned because more people will survive that way, the great Duke always does what is most effective. The best and the worst leader. Therefore, there must be a reason, because he even went against the clan heads. The elder exhaled. The others turned their heads towards him and listened. The woman stood up. She leaned on the table with her hands, without lifting her head. She informed those present that she would conduct an investigation into the fiancé's family. The gray-haired knight stroked his beard and reminded them of the tradition. Even though the girl is a stranger, she must meet with the heads and choose a family. The head of the Tyre family nodded his head and rumbled that not even the Duke could ignore this. Pleased with himself, he smiled. Then they wait 3 days, and then at the ceremony they will announce the tradition. The head of the family will determine the meeting place himself. They knew that the castle was filling with the smell of the flower. They feared for themselves. They could not hold the ceremony where the Duke had everything under control. But the elder expressed his doubts. And if Dylan insists on holding the ceremony in the palace, what should they do then? We are sure that he agreed. After all, he wasn't crazy, especially since the girl was more likely to give her consent under the influence of the Roddica seductress. The woman does not believe that Dylan is willing to face 3 families at once, thus risking his throne. Oh, he continued sinisterly, another Duke will die poisoned. This is the result that awaits the guy if he doesn't take them into account. They knew about the high resistance to poisons, but they could not resist the poisons of the family heads. Antidote recipes had never been leaked before. They concluded as they left the place where they had gathered to discuss. They remembered the message, saying that Dylan was poisoned with Tyre poison. But he returned unharmed and took the position of Great Duke, without even remembering the poisoning. There were different conjectures about the appearance of an antidote, or the woman thought of the young man's fiancé. Maybe she knows something. The girl woke up, stretched in bed. It was easy for her even to breathe. She was happy. Thinking about the air, or the cloth, it is very good. Dylan's blood probably worked after all, a voice said. She raised her head, and the maids were standing in front of her. It was very new for her, because Liddon's servants had never entered her room. She simply exhaled happily, but noticed that some of the girls were also wearing a mask, which meant they could be exposed to poison. If you look closely, they were all from different families. Apparently, they covered their mouths and noses so as not to fall under the influence of the flower. The maid anxiously asked about her mistress's well-being. The Duke ordered that all inconveniences be reported. She assured that everything was fine, but she didn't stay silent and made it clear that they had new faces. The girls bowed deeply to the lady. They are here by tradition, greeting the lady on behalf of the 3 families. A knock was heard at the door, and a voice announced that it was the fiancé who had arrived. The maids were surprised by this and shook their heads. The Duke entered. The maids backed away, as if they were doing something wrong. Silence filled the room. He crossed his arms over his chest. He was not satisfied with this situation. He muttered under his breath. He gave them 3 days. There was no need to disturb her during these days. The girls were embarrassed. They raised their eyes and whispered almost inaudibly that the owner had warned that the great Duke would not forget the customs. Cecilia didn't understand what was happening and what they were talking about, but she saw Dylan exhale in displeasure. He made a gesture with his hand and dismissed the servants. He himself would explain everything to her now. No one argued with the Duke. 3 masked girls looked at each other surprised. Panic was visible in their eyes. They didn't want such an outcome. When the door closed behind them, the young man approached the girl and told her about the custom that other families should have the same opportunities. This was invented by the first great duke. He lowered his head and closed his eyes. This was one of the reasons why it was difficult to bring a foreign fiancé into the house. He looked thoughtfully out the window. Normally, everything would have happened immediately upon arrival. But the guy delayed as best he could so that Cecilia would get used to this place. He brought his hand to his face and extended it as a sign of understanding. That's why these 3 days were necessary. The girl was trying to learn the tradition. She turned her gaze towards him, checking if she looked scared. They weren't planning to wait for the chapter. It was expected. There is a tradition for a bride from the outside world. A ceremony is held, and the future duchess chooses a family to associate with. Surprised eyes stared fixedly at the guy. She considered herself part of the Roddick family. The duke laughed and thanked her for her words. But now, unfortunately, she is a fiancée without belonging. Apart from the family that brought the fiancé, she must meet with the rest of the heads before choosing whom to choose. He sat on the bed next to Cecilia. After choosing the accessories, you can have a wedding. He smiled. He extended his hand, exhaled, wanted to hold her immediately, but understood that it would be difficult for the girl's body to bear it. Dylan said everything correctly. If her body got hurt in the room, it would be even worse outside. Doubts took hold of the girl to play a wedding a few days after her arrival. Will it be too hasty? He brought his face close to hers. If she doesn't like the word marriage, then they can call it a contract between them. He intertwined his fingers with the girl's. As soon as she gets used to the garden, can they have a real wedding? The man assured. The idea of the leading family sitting at the bride's table is terrifying. She brought her hand to her lips, kissed him, and closed her eyes. Everyone would expect her to choose their family. They long for the future mistress to associate with them. The girl's ears turned red, even though the duke brought her. Others are sure that this is a political marriage. They do not know the real motives. Cecilia sighed at these words. That is why they are rushing the ceremony, hoping that the man and the girl do not get close. She smiled. She realized what Cartilla snakes she would have to face. Only she was prepared for this. There is nothing to worry about. Until she chooses a family, no one will be able to harm her. The duke was sure of that. She can do anything. She is free to choose. Dylan even suggested postponing the ceremony, but she shook her head confidently. She can handle it, judging by the fact that they sent maids and disobeyed the 3-day order. The 3 families are much more powerful than they seemed. She brought her hand to her chest. She had problems with the pollen, but now it should disappear. The blood will help her. The serene girl was sitting in a beautiful white dress, turning her head. The servants who watched her saw a weak woman around here. The man started to sweat. Maybe she would discover everything about Karsha, turn everything upside down, and simply run away. Maybe she wouldn't choose the Roddick family. The boy's fears were understandable, but the girl had no idea what kind of thoughts were besieging him. If this happens, she will immediately become an enemy. After deciding how to occupy the place of the Grand Duchess, turning her head, she calmly invited the young man to sit if he was tired, without realizing his torment. Standing at attention, with hands behind his back, he must concentrate on the work entrusted to him. The first head of the family entered, brought his hand to his chest, smiled, his white hair neatly tied in a ponytail, and he introduced himself. It was Reed Kenia. Hearing that he introduced himself, the girl responded by bringing her hand to her chest and saying her name. Only her name, without mentioning her surname. Reed sat down, did not wait for the invitation, left the cane, and immediately expressed his opinion that he did not like strangers. A smile appeared on his lips, but an exception can be made for a person who knows the etiquette of Karsha well. The girl smiled. Specifically, she did not want to give her surname. So as not to mention the Liddon family, it was the right decision, he exhaled. Even a scoundrel who disdains traditions can be taught good manners. The man continued, as if nothing had happened. He clasped his hands. Now the young people have forgot how to respect their elders. And Reed closed his eyes. The smile was firmly stuck to the girl's lips. It became dark, and she herself thought that too much was being said. He didn't have the opportunity to present all the splendor of Kenia to the fiancé, and admitted that he was getting more restless with age. Cecilia was glad when it was over. Finally, she could ask her question. What was so special about the Kenia family? Curiosity won. Stroking his beard, satisfied with himself, he began to say that all the pain that people might experience in this life will pass through his lands. He touched his hand with a sharp movement and clarified that there is no pollen in Kenya. But he refuted this claim. Pollen is everywhere in this garden. He continued smiling to look better in the eyes of the one he wants in his family. You will never feel disgust or unhappiness. A place that gives pleasant things, there you will only remember happy moments. He raised his palms upwards. Sounds good. He turned towards her. Life without pain and without rhinestones is ideal. He brought his hand to his lips. The genius family plant is hallucinogenic. He nodded his head. It is also called sensual genie. Some consider this plant negative, but there is nothing wrong in the fantasy world. Reed expected the girl to weigh all the advantages of his family before making a decision. And he bowed. She nodded, smiled, she would take note. Her face was open, and no one knew her thoughts. The man stood up but did not leave. It would be much easier to live without having to deal with the many inconveniences of the garden. He left without turning back. The girl would definitely choose the Roddick family, but it wouldn't hurt to listen to the others. She lowered her head, closed her eyes. Reed only talked about etiquette, especially about him. Hearing the guard's offended tone, she turned her head towards him. A smile appeared on his lips. An interesting proposal, but not for her. The feeling of pain is not always harmful. This is a signal your body sends you and helps you find the cause of the pain and cure it. With a complete absence of pain, you can skip the point of no return. The result will be death. The head bowed and a sad look from the girl. Sadness in her eyes. That end is not for her. The man nodded his head. He understood the lady's reasoning, but the next chapter is already waiting for the meeting. A woman dressed in red fluttered into the hall. She brought her hand to her chest and introduced herself. Helen Sadie, who has held the position of director for 20 years. She opened her mouth surprised. Given such a spectacular appearance of the head, I thought she would be older. She laughed. Apparently they had overdone it a bit when they lit the light incense for the lady. Honestly, she admitted that receiving strangers in her family, something uncommon. She saw no point in this formal ceremony and bowed her head. Only one thing can guarantee that they are the most glamorous and beautiful family of all. She laughed upon seeing how interested Cecilia was in her family's flower, and allowed her to look closer. The smell would have no effect. If you get to Sadie, Helen will give you a garden that blooms all year round, she promised. A great place to live when you get used to poisons. She apologized to the fiancé, but could not promise her anything great, something as special as all the chapters. She revealed the truth that Dylan Roddick broke the rule and took a stranger as a wife when he was supposed to marry from the Tyre clan. But this does not concern the Sadie clan. In general, she summarized, they do not want to be hostile, no matter which family she chooses. The girl guessed that this alliance is not so strong. They joined only because they didn't want the Roddick clan to become stronger. She stood up, waved her hand, smiled friendly, and hoped they would become friends. She left. She didn't want to drag her to her family. She only said what she wanted and nothing more. She was captivating. After the woman reached the last chapter, a dark-haired man, Kedden Tyre. He bowed, but as soon as he saw the guy standing guarding the fiancé, he clenched his teeth and cursed, why was only his knight standing here? The guy exhaled when the girl thought he was specifying which gender she would belong to, but he remained silent. Kedden said he regretted not being able to send normal knights, and with these words, he ended the girl's choice. He approached and shook Cecilia's hand. He was firmly convinced that she would choose the Tyre family, and was surprised by such a statement. He sat on the sofa. His smile was smug. Of all the duchesses outside, none had yet regretted their decision. Presenting the facts, the Tyre lands are the least poisonous of all. He leaned towards the girl. Dylan was sitting in the office reading another report. The annual request for plants from the Karsha lands had arrived. It seems there was information that magical and poisonous herbs are used for research in the field of black magic. I picked up a sheet with a list of buyers. I need to check everyone again. Black magic always has something wrong with it. Although they hide their identities, they don't know that Karsha has a verified list of all buyers from the outside world. And so he found what he wanted. If Thowd Lidden cannot acquire this plant, then his position in black magic will decrease enormously. A smile appeared on his lips. He decided to consult with she whether it was necessary to provide his brother with the necessary materials. I looked out the window and thought that the girl was already exhausted by the story of the old men about how bad the Duke was. Dusk fell upon the castle. Kedden gave reason after reason to make the decision in his favor. The Tyre family uses the paralyzing herb. He put his hand on his chest. He can regulate the level of poison, so the Tyre family is the best for her. He brought his fist to his mouth and immediately warned that if she chose the Roddick family, it would be a bad choice. He removed his hand from his face. The warning came from him unexpectedly, and the girl realized that the worst relationship was between him and Dylan. Recalling the words of the other heads, she did not notice such anger. Kaiden clenched his teeth. Only the Duke's name sounded particularly malicious. He also remembered the flower of the Roddick family, a seductive flower from which sarcasm exuded. He narrowed his eyes at the night and spoke loudly, so that it could be heard that they used the herb to seduce and mock others. In other words, the finger points at Cecilia. She constantly needs to know if she is under the Duke's control. Kaiden exhaled. Even those with good resistance to poisons have difficulty dealing with obsession, and it is even worse for strangers. The man didn't know why she came here with him, but most likely she was already under the influence, to which the girl replied that this was not possible. The decision was made by a woman in the Empire, so she doubted that Dylan was poisoned there. The head clenched his teeth and angrily asked about love on Cecilia's part. Or do you think the Duke is in love with her? She asserted that this was a lie, pure lie, that he should look for another reason why the stranger was here. And the girl remembered how she saved the guy. Upon meeting her, he decided to give her some advice before leaving. He fulfilled his duty and planted doubts in the girl. The advice was to reject all offers from the families and leave Karsha quickly. This would be her best decision. And then that very day arrived. 3 days later, the time came to give an answer to the heads of the families. A very important and responsible choice. The 4 of them gathered in the castle hall, facing each other, ready to hear the bride's decision. She must choose a family without being under the influence of the seductive Radhika. Her thoughts must be clear. Dylan was angry. They did not allow him to see she, even though she was his fiancée, because this union had not yet been approved. The venomous snakes had crawled too high, but it turned out that if I kept Cecilia all these 3 days in a place where there were no flowers, I hope there will be no speculation about the impact. The Duke invited everyone to sit down. The conversation with him lasted longer than with the others. A break was necessary. The old man scratched his beard and smiled. The girl had spent many hours without a flower, so the choice was obvious. Everyone was nervous. Sweat appeared on the men's faces. Even Dylan was worried, despite the fact that he brought the girl here himself. Helen pressed her hands against her red cheeks. She definitely wouldn't choose his family, so there's no need to worry. She smiled, but the girl's problem was her instability towards poisons. The woman was curious why Dylan had brought a stranger here. The fiancé, in a beautiful white dress, entered the living room and everyone exhaled at the same time. Looking confusedly at the heads of the families, Helen succumbed to her and asked if it was difficult to sort out her thoughts with incense lit in the room. The 3 of them directed their gazes, waiting for an answer, acting friendly because they hoped for an opportunity. Cecilia understood that they would immediately turn their backs on her angrily as soon as she chose one family. But she would not regret her choice. She announced her choice aloud. The family she chose wants her to become Cecilia Radhika. Dylan smiled, confident that the boy would be on his side in any case. The reactions were different. The men looked at the girl in shock. They opened their mouths. Only the clan head's wife knew this outcome, and Reed exclaimed that he was sure. It was a blow to him. Emotions on his face replaced one another. The old man trembled and asked the bride if she would change her mind, because the choice would be final, and she would not return from this family. She brought her hand to her chest and sincerely said that she would become Cecilia von Radhika, and her cheeks blushed. Dylan was very happy. He leaned towards her hand, leaving a kiss on it. The heads of the families were shocked by everything. Turning towards them, the bride made her choice. It is worth rushing the wedding ceremony as quickly as possible. Although this is just an agreement, it is worth creating a beautiful background. The boy expressed his thoughts and looked at Cecilia. The girl looked around. She was surprised. The walls started to move. The room started to change. The Grand Duke calmed Cecilia. He offered her his hand. "It's all right. It's time to get up," and he smiled at her very tenderly. She raised her head. The young man said he didn't know much about what was happening on the estate while she was locked up. A completely green park stretched before her eyes. There were no familiar flowers here, as the fiancé suggested a neutral territory. They were located on the border of Roddick and Tyre. Green leaves extended towards black flowers, shining with bright colors in the sun. Noticing the changes in the girl, I realized she was a little disappointed. If there were no borders, it would be better, much more beautiful. He replied bitterly that this would not happen as long as these poisonous vipers were alive. They covered themselves with masks and were about to leave. He put his arm around Xi's shoulders. He wouldn't be able to show her that view, but since she chose the Roddick family, he stopped only for a moment. Then he continued. The path would be theirs all day long. He said this, and immediately the girl was enveloped in a transparent glow. Flowers surrounded her. She opened her mouth in admiration and watched. He kept his hand on her shoulder, embracing Cecilia. She was grateful that the choice fell on him. She was very happy. When dusk arrived, Mia and the maids greeted the guests. She blushed with pleasure that the girl was back with them. She turned to Dylan. The people of the Roddicky estate immediately understood which family she had chosen. Since they noticed the path, he nodded, confirming their assumption. He was embarrassed, closed his eyes. Now no one will doubt that she is not Roddick. Now everything is clear to everyone. Mia ran cheerfully towards her and waved her arms. She shouted to the lady, with a cheerful face. All members of the Roddick family were happy with the choice. She ran closer. Gratitude escaped her in a slight whisper. The bridal chambers were ready. She hesitated and got confused. Cecilia listened to the report of what they managed to do before her arrival, and it seemed to her that there was a different person in front of her. She guessed that she was nervous at first. Mia brought her hand to her head. She tried to remember what she hadn't said yet. Sweat ran down her face like hail. She forgot something important. They left, leaving the girl in her thoughts, throwing her over her shoulder so that Mijin would do everything at his discretion. This happens to Mia often, so she goes to important things with her brother. And today, she herself ran out to the meeting when she saw the path. Cecilia remembered that the two accompanied Dylan when they met. They were close. She looked at the young man with tenderness in her eyes. She understood that she was very important to him. Her cheeks blushed, she got hot. Approaching the bedroom, they saw the maids. They bowed their heads and thanked the lady for choosing a family. They were happy and satisfied. The maids of all the other families left the castle, as the choice was made. Only the subordinates of the Roddick family remained. The girls opened the bedroom doors. There is nothing to worry about. They will take care of everything. Mian expressed his gratitude to the girl for choosing someone from the family. He will be delighted to serve the lady for a long time. She brought her hand to her chest, bowed. They will see each other quite often, as the guy still performs the duties of a butler. She asked surprisingly about Roddick's inheritance. Mia forgot this important thing and laughed. Recalling them all, the girl felt flattered. She closed her eyes. These people would be close to her. She was sure of it. Today everyone on the central estate was kind and caring. I finally felt at home. The maid helped the young master undress and noticed that he was too well-groomed. I narrowed my eyes when I heard from him about the Lidden family, something important that the boy should say now. He made a gesture with his hand. He clarified something very important. We need to talk about that right now. Stopping the servants in their work, he turned to his brother. As requested, he conducted an investigation, with the exception of Thiod's brother, and the girl's father and his dark magic. He found nothing interesting or unusual. An alliance with such a family will bring no benefit to either the Roddick family or the Cartilla family. Mijin said dryly, there will be rumors about the Duke's wife. And in general, he announced it directly. This was the Duke's first such quick decision. He had never behaved like this before. The maids listened and trembled, heads bowed. Other families will start their investigations, and soon they will find out about the Lidden family. Betraying fears. This will be a way to harm Dylan. Upon learning that his wife would be his weakness, the Grand Duke became sad, and he asked his brother directly, seeing that he was against this wedding. After his mother's death, the boy shut himself off. He did not give free rein to his feelings, rejected all marriage proposals, and then he arranged a wedding that could harm him. The man clenched his hand tightly into a fist and gathered the courage to ask now, because he was worried about his brother. Is there a secret between them? He asked anxiously, bowing his head waiting for an answer. Or the Grand Duke fell in love. Dylan closed his eyes. Memories carried him to the girl. To their first meeting. Seeing his brother's reaction, he felt ashamed. His cheeks flushed, his eyes widened, everything became clear to him. He understood without words that there was love here. He brought his hand to his chest, bowed his head, and expressed his most sincere congratulations to the Duke. Ashamed of this, after hearing Mijin, he gave the order to continue with the preparations. The girls obediently nodded their heads. The appearance of the girl will bring changes to the Roddick family, the young man decided. Dylan's love, for she revived the light that had been lost. The bride's preparations for her wedding night were over. The girl was dressed in a wonderful snow-white nightgown, which highlighted her breasts very well. Ashamed, she listened to the maid. There were no shoes. It is a kind of tradition in Kartila. They never wore shoes on the first night. The girl began to gather her mistress's hair, doing everything carefully and cautiously, warning her to speak if she didn't like something. The maid asked to speak to them informally now, because she is from the Roddick family, and she lowered her head without daring to look. Cecilia thanked the people who would attend to and help her. She kept no secrets and answered sincerely. The maids obediently accepted the lady's will, because the Empress introduced a rule about treating servants with respect. Someone gloved offered her his hand. It's time to accompany her, because everything is ready now. My Radhika stood in front of her. He introduced himself officially. Now he will always take care of the girl, except for special cases. The lady was pleased. I knocked on the door. The wedding hall is a little far, so I should leave now, and the night will see me off. We went out into the hallway. Cecilia saw that the path to the bedroom was covered with a completely white cloth. She looked down in shock. Now she felt like she was getting married. Her cheeks turned red. Mia's voice brought her out of her thoughts, telling her that he was the Duke's brother. The girl realized there was only one surname. Surmijan is also Dylan's brother. He was also the girl's twin brother, and she talked about their relationship along the way. So they walked on the white blanket, holding hands and chatting, trying to calm down. But the goal was achieved. They stopped near the door. Mia looked inside the rooms. His lordship was not there yet. She exhaled in surprise and nodded her head. She returned to the girl. She left her here. She congratulated her again on the wedding. She brought her hand to her chest and nodded. She entered the bedroom. She sat on the bed. From this night on, Dylan would become her husband. She looked up thinking. The subject of her thoughts entered the bedroom, wearing a light black shirt over his bare body. Looking embarrassed, his red cheeks betrayed his excitement. He leaned towards her and told her with feeling that what was happening now was like a dream. A smile appeared on his lips. He touched the girl's airy veil. The man was very afraid that she would refuse him and not go with him to Karsha. He touched a strand of hair. He expressed his fears that tormented him all the time. The fear of choosing another family. He rested his forehead against his beloved's forehead, saying everything that bothered him. Because the poisonous snakes know how to persuade. The guy stood up, smiled. They called him a liar. He understood everything according to Cecilia. He remembered what Kedin told him, that she might be under influence and shouldn't choose Roddick if she didn't want to be in danger. His words would be true if he hadn't given her the antidote himself. He would have pounced on the girl. He would hug her and kiss her, holding her by the waist with his hand. The longer she lives here, the stronger her immunity will become. The kiss became more penetrating. Deeper, the man's lips were already lowered to her neck, and her body was covered with light goosebumps. If this is not enough, he will give a part of himself, and then she will learn to control it. Laying her down on the bed and floating over the girl, she will become part of the garden, like the Grand Duchesses before her, and her husband's voice will envelop her and bewitch her with its hoarseness. Cecilia only received a little of Dylan's blood, so she might change her mind. He is ready to let it be heard if necessary. Closing her eyes, she was sure she would find happiness with him. She smiled and pressed the boy's hand against her cheek. Now she also became Radhika, fingers intertwined, breathing fast. This moment seemed wonderful to them. She will become more invulnerable to Radhika. The Duke has no intention of revealing the secret about the antidote to the rest of the world. The girl's legs rested on the bed. A bliss of pleasure spread throughout her body. Upon opening her eyes, she saw Dylan looking at her, smiling. His eyes expressed tenderness and love. The girl lay in the man's arm, covered with a blanket. The night passed. Morning arrived. Now they are husband and wife. If you want breakfast, then Dylan can ask for food to be brought here, he suggested. Leaning towards her, she agreed with this proposal. She got up and gasped in pain, her hair falling in a wave down her back. She grabbed her legs. The pain was because her legs and hips were numb. She screamed, pressing the blanket. He hovered over her, smiled, closed his eyes happy like a squinting cat. She needs a little warming up, and everything will pass. Dylan took his wife in his arms. Her cheeks blushed. She warmed up, exhaled, and relaxed in his big, strong arms. He carried the girl to the bathtub, got in dressed, and sat with her in the warm water. He whispered seductively in her ear that he couldn't satisfy her needs at night, but that he wanted to take care of her body. She turned around and tried to say something, but Dylan closed her mouth with his kiss. Her eyes opened, but she responded. The tired girl sat up and let the man comb her hair. He smiled. He overdid it too much. The steaming woman collapsed and lay down on the bed. She had no strength for anything. The blush did not leave her cheeks. He covered her with a blanket. Dylan realized that she wanted to sleep. She murmured agreement and laughed at this. He sat next to his wife and fell asleep, murmuring that the deceiver had not kept his promise. It sounds too rude from other families, but not from her, as sweet as an angel. That's what love does to people. Mijan's voice pulled him away from looking at Cecilia, and Dylan opened the door, worried about what had happened. The butler stepped back. He probably should have come later. The Duke asked him to be quieter. The young man cleared his throat, blushed. There were urgent documents from dark mages, and he looked at the sheets. Dylan took the report, started reading. There were complaints and requests from the Empire, and he exhaled. It takes several days to collect this amount, but they keep sending urgent messages and demanding more. Mijan received information from assistants in the Empire. A new trend has emerged among dark mages. It concerned Juna, a tree from the central part of Karsha. It seems to be used for substitution magic. The Duke clarified that the number of requests, that is, increased precisely because of this. Karsha could not ignore the profits gained from selling materials to dark mages. But there was a case where one of them created a monster to attack Karsha. They ate local poisonous plants full of magic and went mad. The mage responsible for everything died from a magical reaction. So Karsha had to deal with all the damage, and sales control was strengthened. I reread the report, handed it to my brother, and let him say that the Duke would contact them soon. Dylan turned around and returned to peace. He gave the order. He is free now. Mijan bowed. He understood everything. Standing in front of the closed door, the boy thought that he had underestimated the resistance of his cousin. The girl woke up to the smell of something tasty, wrinkling her nose, but without opening her eyes, she murmured about hunger. She sat up in bed, rubbed her eyes, and Dylan immediately appeared. He saw that she had woken up and smiled at her. The man had a tray in his hands. He brought the girl mushroom soup. Surely she wanted to try it. He placed it on her bed and assured her that the ingredients were from the Empire, that there was nothing to worry about, that she could eat it in peace. Once she finished eating, Dylan offered to give her a massage to relax her muscles, and he smiled at her with a mischievous grin. She narrowed her eyes, blushed, clarified if there would definitely be a massage this time. Doubts were already crawling under her skin. She guessed what the young man meant. The Duke burst out laughing. His cheeks flushed, and he assured her that of course there would only be a massage. Raising his hand with food to his mouth, he stopped. She heard Mijan approaching. The girl clarified. She exhaled, closed her eyes. Her brother didn't bring the best news, and murmured sadly. The Lidden family seeks to buy materials for dark magic research. The Duke said. He observed his wife's reaction and noticed that she immediately shut down, so she hasn't responded to them yet. The girl heard that whatever she decided would be so. She was surprised that they took her into consideration and trusted her. With a trembling hand, she placed the jar on the table and asked in a low voice, trying to restrain her voice, what ingredient they needed. My husband told me about the Juna tree, which has become a trend, substitution magic in the Empire. In a low voice, she said that Thoud, her brother, had already studied this magic. Substitution magic was well known. Memories carried the girl to the moment when her brother cornered the trembling girl. While watching 2 ways to use the Juna tree, one she knew, but the second stopped. The second one will be tested on her now. She opened the book, and a violet glow burst towards the girl. She closed the book, put her hand on it, and pierced her hand with a sharp dagger. Red blood flowed from the wound, and the girl screamed. Tears welled up in her eyes. She grabbed his hand and was invaded by a heat of pain. The boy saw this, turned around, rejoiced it worked. He shouted, satisfied with himself. Thoud's face darkened. He smiled and explained to the girl that she didn't understand that this was how substitution magic worked. As you use it and the incredibly poisonous Juna tree, you can replace some things. He leaned his face towards her. He did it. He replaced the recipient of the pain. The boy rejoiced. From that day on, she became the subject of pain and suffering for the sake of investigating substitution magic. The man looked at his bandaged hand and murmured, "It would be nice if, in addition to pain, wounds could also be transferred." I glanced at the book. Maybe I made a mistake at the planning stage. And I thought about it. He exhaled. There would be trouble if the wounds remained over time. Thoud lost interest in experiments with substitution magic. The Duke tried to calm the upset Zai, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and asking her to calm down. Now her fate is in the hands of the girl. No matter what she wants, no matter what she does. The reassuring words forced her to remove her hands from her face. She placed her hand on his arm, squeezed it tightly, and admitted that she did not like dark magic. The Duke leaned on him, embracing his wife. He understood what place she had escaped from. There was nothing more to worry about. Everything would be fine. She exhaled, calming down, but when the boy touched her shoulders, they were tense. He approached, closed his eyes, exhaled, and whispered in her ear that it was time for a massage. Zai realized that she had been tricked. The Duke jokingly raised his hands, laughed, felt awkward. They caught him. The girl was embarrassed and asked what the Rodic people would think. It had been so long since she left the bridal chamber. Closing her eyes, she smiled. They will be considered the happiest in the world and will spend time together. Stunned by the statement that she could not leave the room for 3 days. The girl was surprised. She thought it was another custom from Cartilla. She turned to him, narrowed her eyes, smiled too sweetly, let him consider it a custom. Too quickly, Dylan found himself in the same bed as Cecilia, wrapping her in his arms. An unknown man shows his hand at the entrance, with an identification mark on his hand. As circle, he made a deep bow to let the gentleman pass. He held the door, and a man in a black cloak floated in. I entered and heard that everyone here was whispering about the Junot tree. I looked back and walked even further. He sat down on a plush armchair. He pressed his head. Everyone was talking about substitution magic. He said there was a rumor about a delay in delivery. The one opposite extended his hand. The other raised his cheek and clarified, because they were also writing and warning. He took off his mask and held it in his hands. Thowd Liddon smiled at the man, confirming that he had also received the message. The stranger nodded his head. They wouldn't have answered them yet, because the rumor spread too quickly. The little lady became the Grand Duchess of Cartilla. The rest of the people sat down and talked about the Liddon family. They made assumptions. They will probably receive supplies, also for free. They also talked about Cecilia, recalling her reputation. Thowd became gloomy before his eyes. He listened and became darker. It was heard that now the research would become impressive, since dark magic had always dominated. In public he smiled. He narrowed his eyes, confirmed, and nodded his head. He will try, but inside he clenched his teeth. A smile appeared on his lips. He received an answer, but not the one everyone was thinking of. He got angry about this. A response was received from Karsha. It was said that Tiat's request was rejected. Such a result was unexpected for him. And in the future, they will not send materials for research. The guy exploded. He shouted about the contract. He didn't understand why the packages stopped being sent. He punched the air with his fist and asked to complete at least this year's deliveries. But the narrator looked around and asked the man silently. The man extended a briefcase with a letter to him. They asked him to give it to the silent Thowd. There were documents regarding the termination of the contract and payment of a fine for it. He clenched his teeth. The young man was furious about this. They handed all the documents to the boy. They left and said goodbye to Leading. He held the documents in his hand, and his body trembled as he realized. His body started shaking more and more. He squeezed the documents tightly, although he used a pseudonym. But they directly told him that they were breaking the contract with Ted Leading. A man's voice pulled me out of my memories. If you feel responsible, don't worry. Now with these studies, everyone is in the same boat. He tried to calm down. Panic and excitement will not help him now. He needs to find options to deliver the materials. Liddon, Cecilia's brother, could not believe that she dared to disgrace him in this way. But he expected to see her at the banquet, so she would answer for everything. When Zai woke up in the room the next morning, she put her hand on her chest. She found it easy to breathe. She was happy. The Duke entered the room and also noticed that the girl was breathing freely today. Her breathing had become much calmer. She smiled. She became embarrassed. She clenched her hand tightly into a fist. She squeezed it. Today she really felt better. Dylan approached. The girl simply accepted it. That's why it became easy for her. The man was happy. He leaned down and kissed her forehead. It would be even better over time. Reassuring, the best way to gain immunity against Cartilla's poisons. This is exactly what happened to other brides from the outside world. The Duke told his wife. He raised his hand. She looked at her fingers. She definitely felt better. Before, she would get a rash even from pollen, but now nothing. He placed his hand on the girl's stomach. There is a belief that good couples with Rodica give birth to children with great abilities. He raised his face towards Cecilia. Embarrassed. They can check it. The Duke exclaimed. She shouted and her cheeks blushed. But today, Dylan is obliged to offer an outing. He laughed. The girl had darkened already. She rested her head on Shi's lap. Today they need to go to the family cemetery. There are still many annoying traditions ahead. There were no objections, so they will leave as soon as the lady is ready. The horses are harnessed. Departure to the cemetery. The carriage rushes with the Duchess and the Duke. We enter the territory of Radhika. The carriage rushed over the green grass. The horses quickly rushed towards their goal. The driver skillfully controlled the carriage. The girl looked out the window. They were closer than she thought. The family cemetery was not near the central castle. Dylan explained that a person not only from his family could become a Grand Duke. That made sense. She also noticed the pink tree she had seen upon arriving in Karsha, which caught her attention. The Duke saw what caught his wife's attention and tried to tell her about the only tree that was not poisonous. She exhaled surprised. Everything was incredible. She couldn't take her eyes off it. But every year the rosebush weakens, Dylan said sadly, looking at his wife. He didn't know what it was connected to the life cycle or to a toxic neighborhood. She raised her head and thought. She put her hand on her chin and replied thoughtfully that it was growing in the middle of the field, and that Cecilia had only just begun to develop resistance to poison. But he turned to her and promised to go with her after a while. The delighted girl exclaimed joyfully. She closed her eyes with joy. The blush erupted with renewed vigor. The boy had good memories of this place. Cecilia saw the family cemetery. It was very large. A huge hill was dug up for this purpose. She was curious how many people and magic were used to complete such arduous work. He held out his hand to the girl. It was time to go. Faithful knights were always nearby, accompanying them. I caught up with the Duke. It seemed like there was no one else in this cemetery. Peace and tranquility reigned. She raised her head. She couldn't see where the stairs ended. A man pulled her away from that activity and called her by name. Dylan waved his hands, and a blue glow flowed from them. Growing stronger and stronger, the magic flowed in the air. The man held the Radhika flowers in his hands, embracing the blue bouquet with both hands, and looked at the girl. He handed the flowers to his surprised wife and asked her to carry them. She did not expect this, but she remained silent. She carefully grabbed the flowers and hugged them close to her. There might be pollen on them, which was still dangerous for her. The Duke looked at Cecilia worriedly and warned that if it was uncomfortable for her to talk about it immediately. Sweat appeared on her face. She nodded her head. The girl was glad for the concern. She became embarrassed. Her cheeks blushed and she nodded. Dylan looked up. Up there at the top of this cemetery are the graves of the first heads of the family. He explained to the girl. On the way back, you must place one flower at a time. She looked down and hugged the flowers tighter. She honestly admitted that this is one of the many formal ceremonies expected. And if the girl doesn't want to, she can refuse now. They can pretend it passed. No one will say anything. Mia and Mijun pretended not to hear. They looked aside. The girl smiled. She assured everyone around her that she was fine and that everything would be fine for her. And she reassured her husband. And together, they walked up the stairs. The Duke led the way, slowed down a bit, and offered his hand to the Duchess. The knights were last. Dylan abruptly lifted his wife. She screamed in fear, huddled in his arms, and squeezed the flowers tighter. The lady was embarrassed, because behind her were Mijun and Mija, who tried not to look at the couple. Her cheeks turned red. The man looked at her. Light shone in his eyes. There is nothing to worry about them. They are also Rodins, so everything is fine. She didn't hear the cheers. He quickly carried her upstairs. Zai's braid fell down and fluffed up from the sudden movements. He put her down when they reached the spot. Cecilia slid down and looked over her husband's shoulder. The girl shouted loudly. A gust of wind almost carried her away. It scattered her snow-white veil and fluffed up the flowers. With concern in his voice, Dylan turned to Shi and offered his hand with the intention of helping. She turned towards him. She was delighted. It seemed that her resistance to poisons had become stronger. Everything was much better than she thought. She raised her embarrassed face towards the Duke. You don't have to wear the veil anymore. That brought joy. But the boy didn't look like that. He touched his hair. He had waited so long for the moment when he could look at everything without her, that the woman smiled. Cecilia saw the slab. It was there that she placed the first flower. Dylan sat down next to her. Now they will go down and place it on every slab. The knights watched the couple with a smile. They talked sweetly and were so embarrassed that blush periodically appeared on their cheeks. Then they conversed cheerfully and went down to the last slab, thanking the girl for her effort. She placed the flower on the stove, noticed something strange. It didn't look like the others. It had 3 names. She brought her hand to her lips and thought, If she remembers correctly, then Cable and Titan are the previous dukes. I turned to Dylan. She was curious about Aroma. She closed her eyes. He smiled. His mother was his second wife. In a decent society, they don't talk about this. I looked at the boy closely. If he is the son of his second wife, then the history of Radhika's family is very confusing. Crossing his arms over his chest, this is a very simple story. No need to think about it. The first wife suffered from a chronic illness. She exhaled. She put her hand on her chest, so he had no difficulty with the inheritance. There were still problems, but they were small ones. I didn't present this situation with the throne to the girl. Cecilia exclaimed. She didn't expect the boy to have a brother, but he was still standing with his arms crossed over his chest. And he looked smiling. She turned to the knights. With the surname Radhika, she had only met these two people, but she looked at the stove again. She assumed that he had also died, and in shock, brought her hand closer and covered her mouth. Dylan approached the girl and whispered that she was alive and well, that there was no need to make things up. And he laughed. The Duke has a half-sister, Zai exclaimed. She thought she lived on the estate and was already happy to meet her. Unfortunately, the lady had already left Karsha. Cecilia was surprised. The young man put his arm around her waist and would explain everything later. Now it was their turn. I remembered my sister, her words. She said she didn't want to stay in a place full of eccentrics who couldn't give up their principles and points of view. The Duchess laughed. For some reason, she was sure that her sister did not have the best relationship with Genia's family. She heard Dylan joking with her, saying that the girl seemed to like read Genia. She shouted loudly that this was not true, even though the communication lasted longer. So the Duke thought they got along well. In fact, this man just talked nonstop. Cecilia is sure she will have problems with him in the future because of this. Dylan turned around, smiling, trying to minimize contact, as he felt uncomfortable with Reed. Milla and Mijan got into the carriage. They must return to the central castle before it is still light and dark. At night, a girl jumped into her bed. She grabbed the blanket tightly with her hands and repeated this place several times. In a room at the Lytton estate, Cecilia rubbed her eyes and couldn't understand how she ended up in that place. I remembered exactly how I returned to the central castle with Dylan, scared, and couldn't orient myself quickly. Some sound caught her attention, but in the darkness she could not see what was there. She flew out of bed like a bullet and stuck her back to the wall, covered in cold sweat from fear. There was a demonic beast in front of her. Cecilia ran out, followed by the beast, emitting a terrible and piercing sound. It was right behind her. She had no strength left. The run slowed down. The beast did not stay behind. It was moving faster and faster. It caught up with her. The girl did not want to die. She tightly gripped the skirts of her dress, wondering if death, devoured by a beast, was the only option. She ran so fast that she couldn't stay on the stairs and fell, breaking her head, and emitting a hissing sound, with blood appearing on her forehead. I tried to get up, but my body was trembling and would not obey. It was very painful. I leaned on my elbow to get up. The Duchess was losing strength, and with the last bit she had left, she shouted loudly and asked for help, because someone should be here, should hear her. A sound reached her, very similar to the laugh of Thowd, her brother, the smiling face of a boy. She raised her head. Her forehead was already completely covered in blood. She asked her brother for help. Calling him, she waited. But in the darkness, she felt the approach of the beast. Its muzzle was already close. Cecilia felt its breath. At that moment, Dylan was dealing with urgent documents in his office and had no idea what was happening to the girl. All he had to do was sort the invitations, and his work would be complete for today. He brought the letters closer to his eyes, his face darkened, and he began to sweat, realizing that he alone could not make a decision. I decided to take it to her there. I thought it would be strange if she didn't see these letters, and I got up and prepared to leave. As soon as I approached the doors of the chambers and heard Cecilia's soft whisper, I thought she was talking in a dream. It seemed very strange to me. Cecilia was tossing and turning in bed. Tears sprang from her closed eyes, and she tightly gripped the blanket with her hands. Dropping the letters and running quickly towards the bed, he feared something had happened to her. He took her by the shoulders, lifted her from the bed, and shook her, calling her by name, trying to wake the girl up, but she continued to cling to the blanket. She almost woke up, attacked Dylan with her fists. He calmed her down and told her that she was safe now, and that nothing threatened her. Suddenly, she opened her eyes and realized that her husband was in front of her. She exhaled and froze with her fists raised. The Duke let her go. He saw that the girl had woken up and now she didn't understand what was happening to her. All this was not real. She brought her hand to her head. She blushed. Sweat ran down her cheek. She asked for forgiveness. It was the fault of a bad dream. She lay back down on the bed. She closed her eyes. It was just a dream. She calmed down. Dylan was worried about his wife. I saw redness on her body just like at the beginning, from the allergies. He jumped up. He brought his hand to his forehead. She also had a fever. The Duke didn't like all this. He understood that something bad was happening to her. He called the knight, who always followed the girl. He ran towards the chambers. He was nervous. They called him, which meant something happened. Straightening up, the young man gave the order to bring pure Athena. She brought her hand to her chest. She understood everything. She would be there soon. She turned her head on the pillow towards the Duke and apologized for taking off the veil. Lighting a candle, he turned and smiled. There is no need to smile. If anyone is to blame, it is only poisonous snakes. Mia entered. She brought some grass. She was worried about the lady. She wondered what was wrong with her. She should call a doctor and make a guess. She sat down on the bed. Everything was fine, just allergy symptoms, and she closed her eyes. She extended her hand, taking Athena. And maybe the free order arrived. Mia's face showed that she was not very happy about this and was worried about her mistress. She agreed, but she will wait outside the door. If necessary, she will have to call the girl. He gave her the grass. She nodded her head in different directions, refusing to give leaves to Cecilia, only covering her eyes. With one hand, she supported her side. In the other, she held Athena's sheets. Indignant, he asked the girl to let him take care of her body, as she had promised him. Another order came from him, to take off her robe and lie down. She felt embarrassed, but agreed and laughed. She turned around, felt pain. Until she woke up, Dylan supposed. While the man rubbed the red areas of the skin with grass, the girl said that the dream was related to the Lytton estate, and that she was only scared by the memories. She closed her eyes. They had received a request for dark materials, so he was aware of everything. The leading family is involved in dark magic. Dylan knew it, and now the girl did not reveal the secret. Everyone knows what society's attitude is towards this kind of magic. That's why they never boasted about it. And Dylan was aware. A look at the buyer list was enough to understand who was involved in such matters. Cecilia doesn't know how to practice this magic, unlike Thowd, who has the ability to do so. Her stepmother sculpted an evil image to cover up her son. His evil deeds. He twisted the girl like a puppet. The hand with the blade on her body froze as soon as the boy heard that his brother had experimented on her several times. His face darkened. Dylan asked the girl about the experiments in a hoarse voice. His voice portended nothing good. At that time, summoning magic was popular, and Cecilia dreamed of one of these experiments, and she hoped she had inhaled poisonous air. The nightmare was worse than reality. Many things happened in that house, but she believed it would be better not to go anywhere. Or rather, she thought, she paused, that things would only get worse if she didn't behave more calmly. And the 3 members of her family believed she was useless, absolutely useless, in a family of dark mages. I listened and opened my eyes at Dylan's words. He repeated that those people were simply stupid. They did not know the real value of the girl. A smile lit up the Duke's face. Now Cecilia does not have to suffer alone. Now she is not alone. Here you can be capricious and complain. No one will judge her pain. Everyone will try to help, because that is what a real family does. No one will offend. After these words, she ran into the surprised man's arms and hugged him tightly. The young people were glad they met. Dylan hugged her, squeezed her against him, and a smile appeared on his lips. He looked at her. He asked her to let him help her. They will pay for that terrible attitude towards the girl, the man promised. Let her show herself as a grand duchess. The man kissed his fiancée deeply. She kissed him back, merged into a single whole. The castle lights were on, the couple argued, they visited Radhika's crypt, and continued to import goods from the empire. The man held the report in his hands, raised his head, and announced that everything was known. Only this was known, the rest they did not know. There was a crash. A trembling hand broke the fountain pen. He cursed loudly and could not contain his indignation. Cadden jumped off the table, shouting that this was a mockery. He threw everything that was on the table. His face expressed rage. The position of the Archduchess would be taken by a girl from Ter. Next to Dylan, there would be a bride from his family, shouting indignantly. On the table was a book, a list that had been prepared by the head of the Ter clan, with the candidates for the bride of the Radhika family. But the man could not even imagine that the flower carriage would be from the empire, that he would find a bride from the outside world. I grabbed the bridge of my nose. Now imports from the empire are growing at a rapid pace. Obviously, their goal is to develop trade with the empire. The Archduke was supposed to marry a girl from another family, thus supporting the development of the four families. This was the unwritten law of Karsha. Whoever neglected this rule would quickly disappear under unexplained circumstances. Kedon exhaled in that direction. Having calmed down, he decided to find out how things were going with the recruitment. The man replied that they were looking for a maiden from the Radiki castle, but so far without success. Apparently someone from his family interfered. He continued that they decided to take more brutal measures. They were tracking servants and watching them, searching and learning about the most important things. Now completely calm, Kedon sank into a chair. The game was worth it. He wondered if everything was ready. Only securing the route remained, the servant added. Theon would not have resorted to such measures if his son had returned, and tried to justify himself mentally. Dylan returned alone. Perhaps he began to consider the three families his enemies. He clasped his hands. Someone should cut this off at the root. They should act according to the plan. He gave the order. After the servant left, the boss wondered if he didn't love the Duke, and this displeasure was very strong. It would make him regret his choice. On the Radiki estate, Mia and the maid stood holding their breath, watching how they put a spoon into a bowl of soup. After the girl said that she could now eat vegetable soup, the girls shouted with joy and exhaled. The maid listened to the lady. They will take her wishes into account when preparing dishes. If something is needed, they will be happy to help. She lowered her head. Mia was worried about her duchess and said that she should carefully inhale the air containing pollen. Mia thought, very soon the garden flowers will bloom. It was wrong. Cecilia asked about the number of flowers in the garden. She lowered her head, her face darkened, and admitted that even gardeners find it hard to stand the flowers while they fill with poison. The girl immediately raised her head, happy that the lady wouldn't stay here for a year or two, but even gardeners get rashes from the plants. He praised Cecilia. She is adapting very, very quickly. A blush appeared on her cheeks at these words. I looked at my hands. There were invitation letters addressed to the Duchess. I found them under the door this morning. She realized that the invitation from the highest nobility, a drop of sweat running down her cheek. The mood changed instantly. She brought her hand to her chest, heard her feelings, realized that she was no longer afraid of Ziat as before. And she exhaled. She returned to her meal and took some soup with a spoon. Cecilia did not believe she could attend this event and did not want to. She explained to Mia that she would stay in the garden for a while to speed up the adaptation. Her knight understood and accepted the wish. Bringing the spoon to her mouth, she believed she first needed to prove she was on Radika's side, and not go out into the world immediately, only after becoming Duchess. Mia did not take her eyes off the spoon with the food. The eating process was reflected in her pupils. The Duchess eats well. This made me happy. My Jun called and entered, eager to discuss the plans for the day, but he hesitated and saw that the Duchess was still eating. But upon seeing what the lady was eating, he ran towards her, scolding his sister how she could give her this dish when the adaptation hadn't passed yet. The man stopped near Mia, reprimanding her and pointing his finger at her. Apparently the girl didn't know they were so poisonous. Cecilia looked at the knights without stopping. While chewing her food, she was surprised to find that not even a boy could eat this soup. He turned his head towards her. He asked her, surprised about the difficulties in eating, but noticed nothing strange, and he fell silent in a state of shock. The sister took advantage of the situation and hit him on the shoulder. The boy turned completely red. The lady did a great job with the poisonous plant. I listened and thought about the poor young man. What was he eating? But Mijun assured that he was eating grass as an antidote, and Zai wanted to try it too. Mia tried to dissuade the girl from this test. She covered her brother with her hand and could not stand the smell. Cecilia could not stop her desire, so the knight took his hand out of his purse to take out the grass. After searching, he handed a small leaf of this plant to the lady, who accepted it and thanked him. The boy forgot to remind her that the grass tastes bitter. He watched how the girl blushed, worried, and began to find out how she felt. She covered her mouth with her hand. Everything was fine for her. She was not used to such bitter grass. Doubts overwhelmed the girl. She didn't know if it could be taken in its pure form. She suggested adding something sweet to it. Mia remembered how poisonous sugarcane was. The young man couldn't eat it either and thought about it. Cecilia felt very hot. My Yuna. Why does she have to eat such bitter food? She brought her hands to her lips.